When a powerful CEO disappears during the worst snowstorm of the year, everyone assumes she's dead. But at 1 a.m., a struggling delivery driver makes a decision that will either save her billion-dollar empire or destroy his own life. What he finds at that frozen bus stop isn't just a woman in trouble. It's a conspiracy that's been months in the making, and he's got exactly 7 hours to stop it. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this journey reaches. Now, let me tell you what really happened that night. The windshield wipers were losing their fight against the snow. Mason Reed squinted through the white blur, both hands tight on the steering wheel of his decade-old Honda as it crawled through downtown streets that had gone silent an hour ago. The radio had died somewhere around midnight. The heater rattled like it was taking its last breaths. His phone, cracked screen, battery at 11%. Sat in the cup holder showing 1:04 a.m. in those two bright numbers that meant he was late. He was always late. And Ava's babysitter was probably asleep on his couch again, racking up overtime he couldn't afford. 32 years old, and this was his life. Delivery routes that didn't end, bills that didn't stop. A daughter who deserved better than cereal for dinner 3 nights a week. The snow had started during his last drop-off. Some luxury condo in the financial district where a guy in silk pajamas took his package without a word, without a tip, like Mason was furniture that happened to talk. By the time he'd made it back to his van, the city had transformed into something unfamiliar. Street signs buried, traffic lights glowing like distant stars. The kind of storm that made you forget what things looked like before. He should have gone home an hour ago. Should have ignored dispatch when they asked if he could handle one more route. Just one more. We're drowning here, Mason, and you're the only one still out there. Should have said no. Should have learned that word somewhere in the last 6 years since Sarah died and left him with a 6-year-old and a mortgage and this stupid, desperate need to prove he could handle everything alone. The van fishtailed slightly as he turned onto Weston Avenue. Mason corrected without thinking, muscle memory from too many winter nights just like this one. Empty office buildings slid past his windows. A 24-hour pharmacy with its lights off. A bus stop that should have been abandoned, except it wasn't. Mason's foot hit the brake before his brain caught up. Someone was sitting there. Just sitting. At a bus stop on Weston Avenue at 1 in the morning during a snowstorm that had shut down half the city 3 hours ago. No buses running, no cars except his. Just a figure hunched against the cold in what looked like an expensive coat that was doing absolutely nothing against the wind. Keep driving, the rational part of his brain said. Not your problem, not your city, not your responsibility to save every person who makes bad decisions in bad weather. But his van was already pulling over. Mason killed the engine and sat there for 5 seconds, 10, telling himself this was stupid. He'd seen enough true crime documentaries. You didn't stop for strangers at 1 in the morning, didn't matter if they looked harmless. Sarah used to joke that his problem was he trusted people too much, helped too quickly, never thought about the consequences until they were already happening. She'd been right about that. Still. Something was wrong with the picture in front of him. The person at the bus stop wasn't moving, wasn't checking a phone, wasn't doing that thing people do when they're waiting, that restless shifting, that checking of the time, just sitting perfectly still like they'd forgotten how to do anything else. Mason grabbed his phone and climbed out into the cold. The wind hit him immediately, snow driving into his face hard enough to sting. He pulled his jacket tighter, the same jacket he'd been wearing for 4 winters, with the broken zipper and the stain on the sleeve from when Ava spilled hot chocolate last December, and made his way toward the bus stop. 20 feet away, he could see it was a woman. 10 feet, and he could see she was shaking. 5 feet, and he realized exactly who she was. Jesus Christ, Mason said, and immediately felt stupid for saying it out loud. Charlotte Vale looked up at him with eyes that seemed too tired to be surprised. Her face, the same face that appeared on business magazines and local news segments about successful entrepreneurs under 40, was pale in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in that severe style executives wore, hung loose around her shoulders, wet with melting snow. The coat she wore probably cost more than Mason's van, but she looked small inside it. Lost. Bus stopped running, she said. Her voice came out quiet, hoarse. Hours ago. Mason stared at her. Charlotte Vale, CEO of Vale Technologies. The woman who'd turned a failing software company into a billion-dollar empire in less than a decade. He delivered packages to her office building before, Massive glass tower downtown, the kind where security made you wait in the lobby while they verified your existence. He'd seen her photo in the business section when the coffee shop left their newspaper on the counter, and now she was sitting at a bus stop in the middle of a snowstorm, like someone who'd run out of options. "I know who you are," Mason said, because apparently his brain had decided honesty was the best approach. Something flickered in her expression. Not quite amusement, not quite anything. "Then you know I can pay you, whatever you want, just—" She stopped, and for the first time he saw her hands. They were shaking, not from cold, from something else. "I need to get somewhere. Anywhere with a phone that works, please." She said that last word like it hurt coming out. Mason had about 17 questions, starting with why one of the richest women in the city was stranded at a bus stop instead of calling one of the 100 people who probably worked for her, and ending with why every instinct he had was screaming that something was very, very wrong. But what he said was, "Where's your phone?" Charlotte pulled it from her pocket. The screen was black, dead. "Died an hour ago. I tried—" She stopped again, and Mason watched her jaw tighten like she was forcing the words through. "I tried calling, before it died. Nobody answered." "Your driver? Assistant? Somebody from your company?" "I tried everyone." She looked away toward the empty street. Nobody answered. The wind picked up, driving snow between them. Mason watched Charlotte pull the expensive coat tighter and understood with sudden clarity that she wasn't just cold, she was scared. "How long have you been out here?" "Since 11, maybe 11:30. I'm not—" She pressed her fingers against her temples. "I'm not sure anymore. 2 hours. 2 hours in weather that had emergency services telling people to stay indoors. 2 hours at a bus stop with a dead phone while the temperature dropped below 20 degrees. Mason made a decision he'd probably regret. "Come on," he said, turning back toward his van. "I'll give you a ride." He expected relief. Maybe gratitude. What he got was hesitation, Charlotte Vale looking at his beat-up Honda like it was a choice she was still deciding whether to make. "I don't—" she started. "Look, I'm just a delivery driver trying to get home before the roads get worse," Mason said. "You can trust me or you can freeze to death at this bus stop. I don't really care which one you pick, but I'm not standing out here while you decide." That got her moving. She stood, unsteady for a second, grabbing the bench for balance, and followed him to the van. Up close, she was taller than he'd expected, almost his height, but she moved like someone running on empty, like the only thing keeping her upright was sheer force of will. Mason unlocked the passenger door and pulled it open. The interior light flickered on, revealing the chaos of his life. Empty coffee cups in the cup holders, Ava's forgotten jacket on the seat, delivery manifests scattered across the dashboard. Not exactly the kind of car a CEO probably rode in. Charlotte climbed in without comment. Mason shut her door, walked around to the driver's side, and got in. The van started on the second try, small miracles, and he cranked the heat up as high as it would go, which wasn't very high, but it was something. "Where to?" he asked. Charlotte was staring straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. "I need to get to Vale Tower. Downtown, I need—" She stopped, started again. "There's a board meeting tomorrow morning, early, 8:30. I have to be there." Mason checked the dashboard clock. 1:11 a.m. "That's 7 hours from now. You've got time." "No." Charlotte turned to look at him, and the fear he'd seen earlier was sharper now, clearer. "You don't understand. If I'm not there, if I don't show up—" She stopped again, like the words were fighting her. "If you don't show up, what?" "I lose everything." The way she said it, flat, certain, like she was stating a fact instead of a fear, made something cold settle in Mason's chest that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. He put the van in drive and pulled away from the bus stop, windshield wipers fighting their losing battle against the snow. Charlotte was silent beside him, staring out at the white-buried city like she was seeing it for the first time. "What happened tonight?" Mason asked, keeping his voice neutral. "How'd you end up at that bus stop?" Charlotte didn't answer right away. Mason glanced over and saw her jaw working, like she was deciding how much truth to tell a stranger in a delivery van. "Meeting," she finally said. "Emergency meeting. Off-site location. One of my executives, my CFO, said we had a crisis situation with a client contract, said it couldn't wait. Needed to handle it immediately, away from the office." She pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. "Stupid. I should have known it was wrong. Should have questioned it. But he's been with the company for 8 years. I trusted him. What happened at the meeting? Nothing. Charlotte laughed, sharp and bitter. That's the thing. We get there, this warehouse space in the industrial district, and there's no client, no contract crisis. Just him and 2 other executives looking at me like, she stopped, like they'd been planning something. Mason's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Planning what? I don't know. Before I could ask, one of them got a phone call. Said there was an issue back at the office, some emergency with the servers. They all left. Said they'd be back in 20 minutes. She turned to look at him. That was 3 hours ago. They just left you there? Their driver took them. Mine was supposed to wait, but when I came outside, the car was gone. Phone was at 60%. Started making calls. My assistant didn't answer. My head of security? My personal attorney? Nobody. Her voice had gone quiet again. Phone died around 11:30. Started walking. Didn't know where I was going. Found the bus stop. Sat down. Kept thinking someone would come. Someone would realize. Someone would care enough to... She didn't finish the sentence. Mason drove in silence for a minute, processing. The logical part of his brain was already putting pieces together, pattern recognition from another life, another job, before everything fell apart and he ended up driving delivery routes at 1 in the morning. You said there's a board meeting tomorrow morning, he said slowly. Early. 8:30. Yes. What happens if you're not there? Charlotte was quiet for so long Mason thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, emergency clause. If the CEO fails to appear at a mandatory board session without prior notification, the board has the authority to vote on interim leadership, temporary, supposed to be for situations where something happens, accident, medical emergency, death. She said that last word without emotion. 60 days of interim control. After that, they can make it permanent. Who becomes interim CEO? Whoever the board votes in. She turned to look at him again. Want to guess who's been positioning himself as my second in command for the last 6 months? Mason didn't need to guess. Your CFO, Robert Harlow. 8 years with Vail Technologies. 3 years as CFO. Smart, ambitious, and apparently very good at playing the long game. Charlotte's voice had gone hard. He set this up, all of it. The fake emergency meeting, the stranded car, the unanswered calls. He wanted me missing. Wanted me to disappear just long enough for the board to panic and make him temporary CEO. And once he has control, once he has access to everything, 60 days is more than enough time to make sure I can't come back. The van hit a patch of ice and slid slightly. Mason corrected, forcing himself to focus on the road instead of the implications of what Charlotte was saying. That's conspiracy, he said. That's criminal. You could have him arrested. With what proof? Charlotte laughed again, that same bitter sound. Right now, it just looks like I had a meeting, transportation got confused in bad weather, and I made poor decisions about how to handle it. No crime, just unfortunate circumstances. She looked down at her hands. And by the time I can prove otherwise, he'll be running my company. Mason drove. The streets were getting worse, snow piling up faster than the plows could handle it. At this rate, the whole city would be shut down by morning. Perfect weather for a CEO to go missing. So what's your plan? He asked. Get to Vail Tower. Access my office. Use the hardline phone to call the board members directly, before the meeting. Explain what happened. Make sure they know I'm alive and present. Charlotte's voice was steady now, like she was running through a mental checklist. If I can reach them before 8:30, the emergency clause doesn't trigger. Harlow loses his window. And if you can't reach them, then I show up to the meeting anyway. Force them to deal with me in person. Make Harlow explain why he thought I wouldn't be there. She paused. It's not a great plan, but it's what I have. Mason didn't point out the obvious problems, that she was running on no sleep, no phone, no resources, with just the clothes on her back and 7 hours to salvage her entire empire. Didn't mention that people who set up conspiracies this elaborate usually had contingency plans. Instead, he asked, why didn't you just go to the police? After your phone died, find a station. Report what happened. Charlotte turned to look at him, and for the first time that night, something like sadness crossed her face. Because I don't know who I can trust anymore, she said quietly. My CFO. My executives. People I've worked with for years. If they could do this, if they could plan this, then who else is involved? My head of security? My legal team? The board members themselves? She looked away. Going to the police means bringing in people I don't know, making official statements, creating records. And while I'm doing that, Harlow has 7 hours to prepare, to spin the narrative, to make me look unstable, Mason finished. Paranoid. Like you're making accusations you can't prove. Exactly. Charlotte pressed her fingers against her temples again. So I need to get to Vale Tower, need to access my office, my files, my communications, need to find proof of what they've done before they can erase it. Mason glanced at the dashboard clock. 1:27 a.m. Vale Tower's 20 minutes from here, he said. In good weather. Tonight, probably 45, maybe an hour. He paused. But that's not where we're going. Charlotte's head snapped toward him. What? We're going to my apartment. It's 10 minutes away. You're half frozen. You've been outside for 2 hours, and you look like you're about to pass out. He kept his voice calm, factual. You go to Vale Tower like this, you're not thinking straight. You make mistakes, miss things. And if Harlow's people are watching the building, which they probably are, you walk right into whatever they've got planned next. I don't have time to shit. You have 7 hours, Mason interrupted, which means you've got time to warm up, think clearly, and approach this like the CEO you're supposed to be instead of someone who's scared and desperate. He looked at her. Right now you're making emotional decisions, survival decisions. That's how people lose. Charlotte stared at him, and Mason could see the anger flashing in her expression, the kind of anger that came from someone who wasn't used to being told no, especially by delivery drivers in beat-up vans. But then something changed. The anger faded, and what replaced it looked almost like resignation. Fine, she said quietly. Your apartment, but only for an hour. After that, I'm going to Vale Tower, whether you drive me or not. Deal. Mason turned left onto Morrison Street, heading away from downtown. The buildings got shorter here, older. This wasn't the city Charlotte Vale lived in, the one with glass towers and luxury condos. This was the city people like Mason called home. The city where working 2 jobs still meant you couldn't quite make rent. Where you bought generic cereal and wore the same jacket for 4 winters because new ones cost money you didn't have. They drove in silence for 5 minutes. Charlotte had stopped shaking, probably from the heater finally kicking in. She sat perfectly still, staring out the window at the snow-covered streets like she was memorizing them. Why did you stop? She asked suddenly. Mason didn't pretend not to understand. At the bus stop? Yes. You saw me. You could have kept driving, should have kept driving. It's 1 in the morning in the middle of a snowstorm. Most people wouldn't stop. Mason thought about Sarah, about the night she collapsed in the kitchen while he was working late, while Ava was already asleep upstairs. About how their neighbor heard the fall through the thin apartment walls and called 911. About how a stranger's decision to care, to pay attention, to act. That decision bought Sarah enough time for the paramedics to arrive, for Mason to get there, for her to say goodbye to their daughter before the brain aneurysm took her. About how sometimes the only thing standing between disaster and survival was whether someone decided to stop. I saw someone who needed help, he said simply. Charlotte didn't respond, but Mason saw her hands loosen slightly in her lap, some of the tension bleeding out of her shoulders. They pulled into the parking lot of Mason's apartment complex at 1:43 a.m. The building was nothing special, 3 stories of brown brick, built sometime in the 80s, with a flickering streetlight and a parking lot that desperately needed repaving. Apartment 314. Home. Mason killed the engine and turned to Charlotte. Listen, I've got a 6-year-old daughter sleeping upstairs. Her babysitter's probably asleep on my couch. We're going to walk in quiet, we're going to keep the lights low, and you're going to sit at my kitchen table while I make coffee, and we figure out your next move. He met her eyes. That work for you? Charlotte Vale, CEO of a billion-dollar company, looked at the crumbling apartment building and nodded. That works. They got out into the cold. Mason led the way to the entrance, fishing his keys from his pocket. The lobby was dimly lit, smelling faintly of cleaning solution and old carpet. They took the stairs to the 3rd floor. Elevator had been broken for 2 months. Landlord kept promising to fix it. And Mason unlocked apartment 314 as quietly as possible. Inside, the lights were off, except for the small lamp by the couch. His neighbor's daughter, 16-year-old Emma, who babysat for extra cash, was asleep exactly where Mason predicted, phone still in her hand. On the coffee table was the remains of her homework and an empty hot chocolate mug. Mason gestured for Charlotte to follow him to the kitchen. She moved silently, taking in the small space, The worn furniture, the child's drawing stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, the jigsaw puzzle half finished on the coffee table. Ava's current obsession was lighthouses. They'd been working on this one for 3 weeks. In the kitchen, Mason turned on the light above the sink. Low. Enough to see by. He pulled out a chair at the small table, same table he'd bought from a thrift store 6 years ago, and gestured for Charlotte to sit. She did, slowly, like her body was finally catching up to everything that had happened. Mason filled the coffee maker, got it started, then turned back to find Charlotte staring at the refrigerator, at Ava's drawings, at the photo stuck to the door with a magnet, him and Ava at the park last summer, both of them laughing at something Sarah would have loved to see. "Your daughter," Charlotte said. "Ava, she's 6. Probably going to wake up in about 5 hours demanding pancakes and asking 17 questions before breakfast." Mason pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet. "Fair warning, she's going to have opinions about you being here." "What kind of opinions?" "The kind where she asks if you're my girlfriend, if you're a princess, and why you're wearing fancy clothes." Mason poured coffee into both mugs. "She's subtle like that?" Charlotte almost smiled. Almost. Mason set the coffee in front of her and sat down across the table. The kitchen felt smaller with Charlotte Vale in it, like her presence took up more space than it should, or maybe that was just the weight of everything she was carrying. "Okay," Mason said, 7 hours until your board meeting. Let's talk about what happens next." Charlotte wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, like she needed the warmth more than the caffeine. "I need to access Vale Tower's security system," she said. "Check the logs from tonight. See who came in, who left, what time. If Harlow's planning to use the emergency clause, he'll need board members on his side, which means meetings, communications, evidence." She looked up at Mason. "I need to know who's involved. You can access that from your office? If I can get in? My executive access codes should work, but if Harlow's already moving against me..." She stopped. "He could have locked me out, changed security protocols, made it look like a system glitch." Mason thought about that, about conspiracy theories and corporate coups and all the ways this could go wrong. "What about backups?" he asked. "Email servers, security footage, financial records, places where they can't just erase evidence without leaving traces." Charlotte looked at him like she was reassessing something. "You know about system architecture?" "I used to." Mason didn't elaborate. "Answer the question. Are there backups?" "Yes, multiple redundant systems, but accessing them requires..." She stopped, stared at him. "Wait, what do you mean you used to?" Mason took a drink of coffee. It was terrible, bitter and too hot, but it was caffeine and that was close enough. "I used to work in cybersecurity," he said. "Corporate systems, threat assessment, data protection. Good at it too. Made decent money." He set the mug down. "Then my wife got sick, then she died. Then I had a 6-year-old who needed her dad more than she needed whatever money I was making at a job that required 80-hour weeks." He met Charlotte's eyes. "So I quit, found something with flexible hours and no expectation that I'd put work before family. Delivery driving pays the bills, mostly. And I get to pick Ava up from school every day." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. "You gave up your career," she said. "I chose my daughter. Those aren't mutually exclusive." In that job they were. Mason leaned back in his chair. "You want to know why I stopped at that bus stop tonight? Because I've spent 6 years learning the difference between things that matter and things that don't. And someone freezing to death at a bus stop while people drive past because they're too busy, too tired, too focused on their own problems?" He shook his head. "That matters." Charlotte looked away, down at her coffee. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I built my company on the idea that success requires sacrifice. That if you want to win, you have to be willing to give up everything else. Personal life, relationships, sleep." She laughed, sharp. "Look where that got me. Stranded at a bus stop with a dead phone and nobody who cared enough to answer." "Is that what tonight was about?" Mason asked. "Teaching you a lesson about sacrificing too much?" "Tonight was about power, control. Men who decided they deserved what I built more than I did." Charlotte's voice had gone hard again. "Don't confuse betrayal with karma." "Fair point." Mason stood and pulled out his laptop from where it sat on the counter. Old, battered, but functional. He opened it, waited for it to boot up. The screen flickered to life, desktop background showing Ava's gap-toothed smile. "If we're going to figure out what Harlow's planning, we need information," Mason said. You said you tried calling people. Your assistant, security, lawyer. What about email? Phone died. But your email account still exists. Mason turned the laptop toward her. Log in. Let's see what they've been saying while they thought you were missing. Charlotte stared at the laptop like it might bite her. Then she pulled it closer and started typing. Mason watched her work, watched the way her expression changed as she navigated through her inbox. First confusion, then anger, then something colder, more focused. There's nothing, she said after 2 minutes. No emails about the meeting tonight, no messages from Harlow, nothing about an emergency clause or board votes. She looked up. That's not possible. Even if they're being careful, there should be something. Unless they're not using your company email, Mason said. If this is a real conspiracy, they're not going to leave evidence where you can find it. They'll use personal accounts, encrypted messaging, burner phones. He sat back down. What about your calendar? Any scheduled meetings you didn't know about? Charlotte clicked through several screens. Her face went pale. What? Mason asked. Board meeting, emergency session, scheduled for 8:30 this morning. She turned the laptop so Mason could see. It was added to my calendar 4 hours ago, while I was sitting at that bus stop. Mason leaned forward. The calendar entry was minimal, just a time, location, and a note. Mandatory attendance required. Who has access to your calendar? My assistant, my secretary, senior executives. Charlotte's jaw tightened. Half a dozen people, and any one of them could have added this while you were stranded. Mason studied the screen. That's not proof of conspiracy. That's just covering their bases, making it look like you were properly notified. Even though I couldn't have seen it because my phone was dead. They don't know that, officially. As far as anyone knows, you just disappeared after a meeting. Mason met her eyes. Which means someone's going to have to explain why they didn't look for you, why nobody filed a missing person report, why your security team didn't track your phone. Charlotte was already shaking her head. Harlow will say he tried to reach me. We'll say my assistant confirmed the calendar notification went through. We'll make it look like I'm the one who went dark, who didn't respond, who made the choice not to show up. Can he prove that? Can I prove he can't? Mason sat back. She had a point. This was the problem with corporate conspiracy. It didn't look like crime. It looked like miscommunication, bad luck, unfortunate timing, and the people orchestrating it were experts at making themselves look innocent. Okay, Mason said, let's approach this differently. You said Harlow needs board members on his side to vote him in as interim CEO. How many board members are there? 7, including me. So he needs 4 votes, minimum. Maybe more if there's an abstention rule. Mason grabbed a piece of paper from the junk drawer and a pen. Who's most likely to side with him? Charlotte thought for a moment. David Chen, head of the audit committee. He and Harlow have been close lately. Probably him. She paused. Margaret Weiss. She's been vocal about wanting younger leadership. Thinks I'm too cautious with expansion. Mason wrote down the names. That's 2. Who else? James Bradford, former CEO of one of our competitors. We acquired his company 3 years ago. He's never forgiven me for that. Charlotte's voice was bitter. And Patricia Oakes. She's been pushing for operational changes I've resisted. We've clashed. 4 votes, Mason said. That's enough to trigger the emergency clause and install Harlow as interim CEO. If I'm not there to stop it, and if you are there, Charlotte was quiet. Then it becomes a fight. Harlow accuses me of being unstable, unreliable, points to tonight as evidence, says I've been under stress, making poor decisions. The board will have to choose who to believe. She looked at Mason. And right now, I don't have proof of anything. Mason studied her. Charlotte Vale, CEO. One of the most powerful women in the city. And she looked exhausted, running on empty, fighting a battle she wasn't sure she could win. But there was something else in her expression too. Something harder. More determined. So we get proof, Mason said simply. Charlotte blinked. We? You think I drove you to my apartment at 1 a.m. just to make coffee and send you on your way? Mason stood and refilled his mug. You've got 7 hours to save your company. I've got 7 hours before Ava wakes up and I have to explain why there's a billionaire at our kitchen table. He turned back to Charlotte. Seems like we're on the same timeline. You don't have to. So, I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. Mason sat back down. Now stop arguing and tell me everything you know about Vale Technologies' security system. Charlotte stared at him for a long moment. Then something in her face shifted. walls coming down, decisions being made. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." And she started talking. For the next hour, they worked. Charlotte explained Veil Technologies' security architecture, the redundant servers, the backup systems, the access protocols that governed who could see what and when. Mason listened, asked questions, made notes. His old training kicked in without effort. Pattern recognition and system logic that he thought he'd left behind years ago. "If Harlow's been planning this for months, there'll be traces," Mason said, scrolling through a diagram Charlotte had sketched on paper. "Financial irregularities, unauthorized access attempts, communication patterns that don't make sense." He looked up. "You said he's been positioning himself as your second in command. How?" "Gradually, taking on more responsibility, volunteering for projects I didn't have time for, building relationships with board members." Charlotte's voice was flat, factual. "I thought he was being ambitious, proving himself. I thought—" She stopped. "You thought you could trust him." "I thought loyalty mattered." Charlotte laughed, sharp and bitter. "Turns out it doesn't, not when there's a billion-dollar company on the line." Mason wanted to argue that point, wanted to say that loyalty did matter, that trust wasn't weakness, that the problem wasn't her judgment, but Harlow's choice to betray it. But he'd learned over the last 6 years that sometimes people didn't need reassurance. They needed solutions. "Financial records," he said. "If Harlow's building a case to take over, he'll need to show the board that he can run the company better than you, which means he's been documenting things, building a narrative." Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "You think he's been manipulating the reports?" "I think he's been interpreting them, framing things in a way that makes your decisions look questionable and his judgment look superior." Mason leaned forward. "Can you access the financial database from here?" "Not without VPN access to the company servers. And if I log in remotely, it'll create a record. Harlow will know." "Let him know. You're the CEO. You're allowed to access your own company's files. Not if he's already changed the security protocols. Not if—" Charlotte stopped, stared at Mason. "Wait. My old access codes. Before the most recent system update. We changed everything 6 months ago for security reasons, but the legacy system should still have read-only access to archived records." "And Harlow wouldn't think to lock those out," Mason finished, "because they're legacy, outdated." "Exactly." Charlotte pulled the laptop back toward her. "I need to— give me a minute." She typed fast, navigating through screens Mason only half recognized. Code scrolled past. Error messages appeared and disappeared. Charlotte swore under her breath. Creative profanity that made Mason briefly reconsider his impression of how CEOs talked. Then, "I'm in." Mason moved to look over her shoulder. The screen showed what looked like an old database interface, clunky and dated but functional. Rows of financial data stretching back years. "What are we looking for?" Mason asked. "Discrepancies. Budget allocations that don't match board approvals. Projects that got funding without proper authorization." Charlotte scrolled through the records. "Harlow's smart. If he's been embezzling, it'll be small amounts. Things that look like rounding errors or accounting adjustments." They searched for 20 minutes. Charlotte navigating, Mason asking questions when something didn't make sense. And slowly, a pattern started to emerge. Small transfers. Routine expenses that were slightly higher than they should be. Consulting fees for companies that didn't quite exist. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Just a steady bleed of money that added up to $700,000, Charlotte said quietly. Over the last 18 months. Mason stared at the numbers on the screen. "That's embezzlement. That's motive." Charlotte sat back. "Harlow's been stealing from the company. And if I found out, if I brought this to the board, he'd lose everything. His job, his reputation, probably face criminal charges." "So he had to get rid of you first," Mason said slowly. "Before you discovered what he'd been doing, before he got caught. And the emergency clause gives him 60 days as interim CEO. Enough time to erase the evidence, make the transfers look legitimate, cover his tracks." Charlotte turned to look at Mason. "This isn't just about power. It's about survival. His survival." The kitchen felt very quiet suddenly. Mason glanced at the clock on the microwave. 3:47 a.m., less than 5 hours until the board meeting. "This is proof," he said. "Real proof. You bring this to the board, It's archived data from a legacy system that's not admissible in court, Charlotte interrupted. Harlow will say the records are corrupted, that the old system had glitches, that I'm making accusations I can't prove with current verified data. So we get current verified data. How? I can't access the main financial system without leaving traces. And the moment Harlow knows I'm digging, he'll lock me out completely. Mason thought for a minute. There had to be a way. Had to be some angle they weren't seeing. Your board members, he said suddenly, the ones Harlow's been building relationships with. What if they have copies of financial reports, documents he sent them to build his case? Charlotte's eyes widened. If Harlow's been preparing for this, he would have been feeding them information, making himself look indispensable, showing them data that makes me look incompetent. And if we can get those documents, we can see exactly what he's been telling them, what narrative he's built. Charlotte stood abruptly. I need to contact them, now, before the meeting. With what phone? Charlotte stopped, looked at Mason. Can I use yours? Mason pulled out his cracked screen phone, battery now at 7%. It's almost 4 in the morning. You really think they're going to answer a call from a number they don't recognize? They will if I tell them who I am. And say what? Hi, this is Charlotte Vale. I'm not actually missing, but I think my CFO is trying to stage a corporate coup. Mason shook his head. They'll think you sound crazy, Charlotte finished. Paranoid, exactly what Harlow wants them to think. She sat back down, and Mason watched the fight drain out of her expression. This was the problem with conspiracy. The people orchestrating it were good at making their victims look unstable, unreliable, hysterical. Every word Charlotte said in her own defense would sound like exactly what someone losing control would say. We need a different approach, Mason said quietly. Charlotte looked at him. I'm open to suggestions. Mason thought. Old instincts, old training. The part of him that used to solve problems like this for a living. The part that understood systems and people and the space where they intersected. Information wants to be found, he said slowly. Harlow's been communicating with board members, building his case. That means there's a paper trail somewhere, emails, documents, messages. I already told you, my company email, not your company email. His. Mason met Charlotte's eyes. What if we could access Harlow's communications, see exactly what he's been sending to board members? That's illegal. Unauthorized access is exactly what they're doing to you. Mason kept his voice calm. I'm not saying we do it. I'm saying we think about it. Because right now, you're playing defense, reacting to what they've already done. If you want to win this, you need to get ahead of them. See what they're planning before they execute it. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. Then, even if I wanted to access Harlow's email, I can't. Not from here. His account is on the company servers with encryption and two-factor authentication. What about his personal email, his phone? I don't have his passwords. Do you have his phone number? Charlotte rattled it off from memory. Mason pulled his laptop closer and started typing. What are you doing? Charlotte asked. Something I probably shouldn't. Mason navigated to a website that looked like it had been designed in 2005. There are services that track phone locations, legitimate ones for families, employees, less legitimate ones for people who want to know where someone is without them knowing. That's gray area legally. Mason looked up. Like I said, something I probably shouldn't do. But you want to know where Harlow is right now? What he's doing while he thinks you're missing? Charlotte stared at him, then slowly nodded. Mason entered Harlow's number and waited while the ancient website did its thing. It took 3 minutes. Then a map appeared on screen showing a blinking red dot in downtown, an address Mason recognized. Vale Tower, Charlotte said quietly. He's at the office. At 4 in the morning, hours before the board meeting, working. Question is, Mason said, what's he working on? They looked at each other across the kitchen table, and Mason saw the moment Charlotte made a decision. Saw it in the way her expression hardened, the way she sat up straighter. We need to go there, she said. To Vale Tower? Yes. If Harlow's there now, that means he's preparing something. Evidence, documentation, something he's going to present to the board in, she checked the time, 4 hours. Charlotte stood. I need to see what he's doing. Need to know what I'm walking into. If you show up at Vale Tower right now, you lose the element of surprise. Harlow will know you're there. Will know you're not missing. Whatever advantage you have disappears. So I don't let him see me. Charlotte's voice was steady now, decisive, CEO mode. I know that building better than anyone. I know ways in he wouldn't think to watch. And I know where he'll be, his office or the executive conference room. I can stay hidden, watch, see what he's planning. Mason wanted to point out about 17 different ways this could go wrong. Wanted to remind Charlotte that corporate espionage was a crime, that trespassing was a crime, that everything they were discussing was probably illegal in ways that would make lawyers rich and send them both to jail. But then he looked at her face, at the determination there, the desperate need to fight back instead of just surviving, and recognized something familiar. This was what people looked like when they stopped running from disaster and started running toward it. Sarah had looked like that near the end, stubborn, defiant, refusing to go gentle into anything. And Mason had learned that sometimes the only thing you could do was respect that choice and help them make it. Okay, he said quietly. We'll go to Vale Tower. Charlotte blinked. You think I'm letting you walk into a potential ambush alone? Mason stood and grabbed his jacket from where it hung by the door. Besides, if you're going to sneak into your own building, you need someone who understands security systems, cameras, access points, ways in and out that don't trigger alarms. You know how to do that? Used to, but it's like riding a bike. Mason turned back to her. Painful if you haven't done it in years, but you don't really forget. Charlotte almost smiled. Almost. Then a small voice came from the doorway. Daddy? They both froze. Ava stood in the kitchen entrance rubbing her eyes, her favorite stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. She wore mismatched pajamas, one of Mason's ongoing parenting failures, and her dark hair stuck up in about 40 different directions. Hey, sweetheart, Mason said, keeping his voice soft. What are you doing up? Heard talking. Ava's eyes moved to Charlotte. Who's that? This is Charlotte. She's... Mason hesitated. She needed help, so I'm helping her. Ava studied Charlotte with the unsettling intensity only 6-year-olds could manage. Then she walked over and held up her stuffed rabbit. This is Mr. Carrot. He helps when people are sad. Charlotte stared at the rabbit, then at Ava, then at Mason like she had no idea how to respond to this situation. Tell her thank you, Mason said quietly. Thank you, Charlotte said, and her voice cracked slightly on the second word. Ava nodded, satisfied. Are you staying for breakfast? We have cereal. Daddy burns pancakes. I don't burn them, I just... Mason stopped. It's 4 a.m, Ava, way too early for breakfast. But she's here. Charlotte has to go soon. She has important work stuff to handle. Is it bad work stuff? Ava asked, looking at Charlotte again. You look like when Daddy has bad work stuff. Tired. Mason saw something shift in Charlotte's expression, a crack in the armor. Yeah, Charlotte said quietly. It's bad work stuff. Oh. Ava thought about that. Then, want to see my puzzle? We're building a lighthouse. It's really hard. Ava, Mason started. It's okay, Charlotte interrupted. She looked at Mason, then back at Ava. I'd like to see your puzzle. Ava's face lit up. She grabbed Charlotte's hand and pulled her toward the living room, chattering about lighthouses and why they're important, and how this one has 300 pieces, which is a lot, but they're almost done. Mason followed, watching Charlotte kneel beside the coffee table where the puzzle lay half-finished. Ava immediately launched into an explanation of their strategy. Edges first, then corners, then the tricky middle part where everything looks the same. Charlotte listened. Actually listened. Asked questions. Let Ava show her which pieces went where. And for just a moment, in the dim light of Mason's living room at 4 a.m, Charlotte Vale looked less like a CEO fighting for her empire and more like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be around people who didn't want something from her. Emma, the babysitter, stirred on the couch, blinked awake, saw Charlotte, and did a double take that would have been funny under different circumstances. Mr. Reed, she said, sitting up, is everything... Everything's fine, Emma. Thanks for staying over. Mason pulled out his wallet and handed her 3 20s, more than he'd planned to pay, but less than she deserved. You can head home. I've got it from here. Emma took the money, grabbed her things, and left with one last confused look at Charlotte. The door clicked shut behind her. Ava was still explaining puzzle strategy. Charlotte was still listening, kneeling on the floor in her expensive coat like this was completely normal. Mason checked his phone. 4:23 a.m. Less than 4 hours now until the board meeting that would decide Charlotte's fate. Ava, he said gently. We need to go soon. Charlotte and I have to take care of some stuff before the city wakes up. Ava looked disappointed. But we didn't finish the puzzle. We'll finish it later, promise. Can Charlotte come back to help? Mason looked at Charlotte, who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Maybe, Charlotte said softly. If your dad doesn't mind. I don't mind, Mason said, and meant it. Ava hugged Mr. Carrot tighter. Okay, but be careful. Daddy's car is really old and makes scary noises. I'll be careful, Charlotte promised. They got Ava settled back in bed, Mason tucking her in, promising pancakes that weren't burned when she woke up. By the time he came back to the living room, Charlotte was standing by the window, looking out at the snow-covered city. Your daughter's sweet, she said without turning around. She likes you. She doesn't know me. 6-year-olds are good judges of character. Mason grabbed his car keys. You ready for this? Charlotte turned to face him. In the dim light, she looked young suddenly, vulnerable. Nothing like the intimidating CEO who appeared on magazine covers. No, she said honestly, but I don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Not when the alternative is losing everything you built. Mason wanted to argue that point, wanted to say that companies were just companies, that empires rose and fell, that there were more important things than billion-dollar corporations. But he looked at Charlotte's face and understood that for her, Vail Technologies wasn't just a company. It was proof. Proof that she was capable, valuable, worthy. Proof that she mattered. Losing it would mean losing herself. Then let's make sure you don't lose, Mason said simply. They walked out of apartment 314 together, into the cold pre-dawn darkness, toward whatever waited for them at Vail Tower. Neither of them noticed the car parked across the street. The one that had been sitting there since 2 a.m., engine running, watching the building with professional patience, or the way its headlights flickered on as Mason's van pulled out of the parking lot, following at a careful distance through the snow-buried streets toward downtown. Toward Vail Tower, toward the confrontation that would determine whether Charlotte Vail survived the night or disappeared forever. The downtown streets were emptier than Mason had ever seen them. Even at 4:30 in the morning, there were usually delivery trucks, early commuters, the occasional taxi hunting for fares. But tonight the snow had won. The city belonged to the storm. Mason's van crawled through the intersections where traffic lights blinked yellow into nothing. Beside him, Charlotte sat perfectly still, staring out the windshield like she could will Vail Tower into appearing faster. Her hands were folded in her lap again, that same position from the bus stop, controlled and tense. You're quiet, Mason said. I'm thinking. About? Charlotte didn't answer right away. The van's heater rattled, fighting a losing battle against the cold seeping through the cracked weather, stripping around the doors. Mason made a mental note to fix that. Added it to the list of things he'd been meaning to fix for 6 months and probably wouldn't get to for 6 more. About what I'm going to say, Charlotte finally said. When I see him. Harlow. What words to use. How to stand. Whether to come in angry or cold or... She stopped. It's stupid. I'm rehearsing a confrontation that might not even happen. It's not stupid. It's preparation. It's anxiety disguised as strategy. Charlotte turned to look at him. You ever do that? Play out conversations in your head before they happen? Figure out exactly what you're going to say, how they'll respond, what you'll say back? Every single day, Mason admitted. Usually with Ava's teachers, or the landlord, or the babysitter when I'm running late again. He glanced at her. Never works out the way I plan. Never? People don't follow the script. They say things you didn't expect, react in ways that don't make sense. Mason turned left onto Commerce Street. Vail Tower was 6 blocks away now. Best you can do is know what you want out of the conversation and be flexible about how you get there. What I want is my company back. Then that's your North Star. Everything else is just weather. Charlotte almost smiled at that. Almost. They drove in silence for another minute. The buildings got taller, newer, glass and steel replacing brick and mortar. This was Charlotte's neighborhood, the part of the city where decisions got made and money changed hands, and people like Mason only showed up to deliver packages. There, Charlotte said, pointing ahead, Vail. Tower rose out of the snow like something from a different world. 43 stories of dark glass and chrome, top floors disappearing into low clouds. Most of the windows were black at this hour, but scattered lights marked where people were working. 4th floor, 17th floor, 38th floor, and the executive suite on 42, where every window blazed with light. "He's up there," Charlotte said quietly. Mason pulled into a parking garage 2 blocks away. Public access, pay by hour. The kind of place where nobody asked questions as long as you fed the machine. He killed the engine and turned to Charlotte. "Last chance to walk away from this," he said. "We could go to the police, make an official report, let them handle it, and spend the next 4 hours explaining why a CEO was stranded at a bus stop while her CFO stages a corporate coup." Charlotte shook her head. "By the time they take me seriously, the board meeting will be over. Harlow will be interim CEO, and I'll be the paranoid executive who cried conspiracy." She wasn't wrong. Mason grabbed a baseball cap from the back seat, black, generic, the kind 1,000 people in this city owned. He handed it to Charlotte. "Put this on. Pull your hair back. Keep your head down." Charlotte took the cap, tucked her hair up under it. The transformation was immediate. Without the styled hair and the expensive coat worn open, she looked less like a CEO and more like someone's assistant working an early shift. "Better," Mason said, "but we need to do something about the coat." "What's wrong with my coat? It costs more than my van. Anyone sees you in that, they'll remember." Mason pulled off his jacket and handed it to her. "Here, trade." Charlotte stared at the worn jacket with its broken zipper and coffee stains. "You're serious? You want to blend in, or you want to make a statement?" She took the jacket, put it on over her expensive one, the sleeves slightly too long. Mason watched her button it up and understood that Charlotte Vale had probably never worn anything second-hand in her life. "How do I look?" she asked. "Like someone who works for a living?" Mason put on Charlotte's coat. It fit wrong. Too tight in the shoulders, too short in the arms, but it would do. "Come on, we're burning time." They got out into the cold. The parking garage was mostly empty, just a few cars scattered across the lower levels. Their footsteps echoed off concrete as they made their way to the street entrance. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow drove horizontally now, stinging exposed skin. Mason pulled the expensive coat tighter and immediately felt guilty about getting it dirty. This thing probably cost $5,000. Maybe 10. More than he made in a month. Charlotte walked beside him, head down, hands shoved in the pockets of his jacket. From a distance, they looked like 2 early shift workers heading into the office. Nobody worth paying attention to. Vale Tower's main entrance was still 3 blocks away. Mason steered them down a side street away from the main road. "Where are we going?" Charlotte asked. "Service entrance. Loading docks. Somewhere without security cameras pointed at the front door." "How do you know Vale Tower has a service entrance?" "Every building has a service entrance. Delivery drivers learn them all." Mason turned down an alley that ran behind the tower. "I've dropped packages at your building maybe 20 times. Never through the front, always through the back where they don't have to see us." There was an edge to his voice he hadn't intended. Charlotte noticed. "I didn't design the building that way," she said quietly. "I know, but someone did. Someone decided delivery drivers weren't important enough to use the nice entrance." Mason stopped at a metal door marked Authorized Personnel Only. "This is it. Loading dock 3. Should be unlocked during business hours." It's 4:30 in the morning. For places like this, business hours start at 5. Cleaning crews, early security shifts, people who keep the building running while executives sleep. Mason tried the door. Locked. "Okay, plan B." "What's plan B?" Mason pulled out his phone, battery at 4% now, hanging on by sheer stubbornness, and started scrolling through his contacts. Found the name he wanted, sent a text. "Who are you texting?" Charlotte asked. "Someone who owes me a favor." They waited in the cold. 30 seconds. A minute. Mason's phone buzzed. The reply was just a door code. 4789#. "Friend of yours?" Charlotte asked. "Guy I used to work with. Before. He's on the night security team now." Mason punched in the code. The door clicked open. "Come on." They stepped into a concrete corridor lit by fluorescent lights that hummed like angry insects. The air smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played classic rock at low volume. Mason led them down the corridor, past supply closets and equipment rooms, toward the service elevator at the far end. His footsteps were quiet on the concrete. Charlotte's expensive boots, still visible under his jacket, clicked loudly with each step. "Take those off," Mason whispered. "What?" "Your boots. They're too loud. Someone hears us. This is over." Charlotte stared at him, then bent down and pulled off her boots, holding them in one hand. Her socks were thin, designer probably, completely inadequate for walking on cold concrete, but she didn't complain. They reached the service elevator. Mason hit the call button and waited, listening for voices, footsteps, any sign they'd been noticed. The elevator arrived empty. They stepped inside. Mason pressed 42. "Your friend's not going to report this?" Charlotte asked as the doors closed. "Marcus? No, he knows I wouldn't ask unless it mattered." Mason watched the floor numbers climb. "We were in the same cybersecurity training program, back when I had a career. He got laid off 3 years ago, couldn't find work in his field. I helped him get the security job, wrote a recommendation, called in a favor with someone I knew. So now he's returning the favor. That's how it works when people actually give a damn about each other." The elevator climbed. 27th floor, 31st, 35th. The numbers kept going up and Mason's stomach kept getting tighter. This was the part where things could go wrong, where they'd step out into the executive suite and find Harlow waiting, or security, or any one of a dozen complications that would turn this from corporate espionage into something worse. 40th floor. 41st. "When we get there," Charlotte said, "we split up. I know where Harlow's office is, know where he keeps his files, his laptop. If there's evidence of the embezzlement, of the conspiracy, it'll be there. And if he's in his office, then I improvise." Mason looked at her. "That's not a plan." "It's all I've got." The elevator chimed, 42nd floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that looked like something from a magazine spread. Marble floors, leather furniture, abstract art that probably cost more than Mason's apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows showing the city below, snow swirling against the glass like static. Empty. They stepped out carefully, Charlotte still holding her boots. The reception area opened into a wide corridor lined with executive offices. Lights were on in 3 of them. Doors closed. Charlotte pointed to the office at the far end. "Corner position, best view. That would be Harlow's." Mason nodded. They moved quietly down the corridor, staying close to the wall. Past the first office, dark inside, computer screen glowing blue. Past the second, someone's jacket hanging on a chair, coffee mug on the desk. The third office was the conference room. Door slightly ajar. Voices coming from inside. Mason and Charlotte froze. "Board members confirmed for 8:30, a male voice was saying. "Professional, controlled. Chen and Weiss are already on board. Bradford's leaning yes. Oakes will vote however the wind blows." "What about Vale?" A second voice, older. "Any word?" "Nothing. Phone's still off. No activity on her accounts, no security footage showing her anywhere near the building." The first voice paused. "Far as anyone knows, she disappeared after the meeting last night." "Perfect." Mason felt Charlotte tense beside him. She started to move toward the door. He grabbed her arm, held her back, shook his head. "Not yet." "What about the vote itself?" the second voice asked. "Any chance this blows up in our faces?" "No chance. Emergency clause is clear. CEO fails to appear at a mandatory session. Board can vote interim leadership. Vale wrote those bylaws herself. She's locked in by her own rules." Someone laughed. "Poetic. Once I'm interim CEO, I'll have full access. 60 days to clean up the financial discrepancies, make the embezzlement charges disappear, position myself as the obvious permanent replacement." The first voice, Harlow, Mason realized, sounded satisfied. "By the time Vale resurfaces, assuming she does, it'll be too late. Company will be mine." Charlotte's face had gone pale. Mason tightened his grip on her arm. If she went in there now, angry and unprepared, this whole thing would fall apart. "What if she shows up anyway?" the second voice asked. "What if she makes it to the meeting?" "She won't. Even if she got her phone charged, even if she found transportation, she'd still have to explain where she's been for the last 8 hours, why she didn't contact anyone, why she didn't respond to the calendar notification." Harlow sounded confident. "She'll look unstable, unreliable, exactly what I've been telling the board for months. And if she has evidence? Proof of what we've done? What evidence? We've been careful. No paper trail, no emails, nothing she can use against us." Harlow paused. "Besides, even if she somehow found something, Who's going to believe her? The stressed-out CEO making paranoid accusations about her loyal CFO? We've already planted the seeds. Board thinks she's been struggling, making poor decisions. This is just confirmation. The second voice laughed again. You've thought of everything. That's why I'm about to be CEO. Mason felt Charlotte shaking, rage probably, or fear, or both mixed together into something volatile. He pulled her away from the door, back down the corridor, into the dark office they'd passed earlier. Inside, he closed the door and turned to face her. Charlotte was crying, silent tears running down her face, jaw clenched like she was fighting to keep from screaming. They planned everything, she whispered. Every detail. The meeting, the stranded car, the unanswered calls. They knew exactly what they were doing. I know. And they're going to get away with it. Even if I show up, even if I fight back, they've already won. They've already... Her voice cracked. I built that company from nothing. Spent 10 years sacrificing everything, and they're just taking it like it's theirs, like I don't matter. Mason wanted to tell her it would be okay. Wanted to promise that justice would win, that truth would prevail, that all the things people said when they were trying to make someone feel better would actually turn out to be true. But he'd learned 6 years ago that sometimes the world didn't care about justice. Sometimes bad things happened to good people, and there was no cosmic balance, no divine intervention, just the cold reality that you either fought back or you lost. You matter, he said quietly, and we're not done fighting. Charlotte looked at him. Did you hear what they said? They've covered everything. No evidence, no proof, just my word against theirs. We've got the financial records, the embezzlement. From a legacy system that's not admissible in court, Harlow will say it's corrupted data, and he's right. No judge would accept it, Mason thought. They needed something current, something Harlow couldn't dismiss or explain away, something that proved conspiracy beyond reasonable doubt. His eyes landed on the computer in this office, screen still glowing. Someone had left it logged in. Whose office is this? He asked. Charlotte looked around, saw the nameplate on the desk. David Chen, head of the audit committee, one of Harlow's allies, one of the board members who was already on board with the coup. Mason walked to the computer. The email application was open, inbox showing unread messages. He scrolled through quickly, looking for anything from Harlow, anything that might... There. An email thread from 2 days ago. Subject line, Board Transition Plan. Mason clicked it open. Started reading, and with each line the picture got clearer. Harlow had sent Chen a detailed document outlining the entire conspiracy. The fake emergency meeting, the plan to strand Charlotte, the exact timeline for triggering the emergency clause, projections for the board vote, financial data that supposedly showed Charlotte's mismanagement, data Mason now recognized as carefully manipulated to support Harlow's narrative. And at the bottom, a line that made Mason's blood run cold. Once the transition is complete, all supporting documentation will be permanently archived. No traces. Charlotte, Mason said quietly, come look at this. She crossed to the computer, read the email. Her expression shifted from despair to something harder, more focused. This is it, she whispered. This is proof, real proof. Current evidence in a live email system. Can you access this remotely? Download it somehow? Not without Chen's password. And if I try to send it from his account, it'll create a record. Harlow will know someone accessed the email. Mason thought fast. They needed this email, needed proof of the conspiracy that couldn't be dismissed or explained away, but they also needed to get it without alerting Harlow that they'd found it. Your phone, he said. Take a picture of the screen. My phone's dead. Mine's at 4%. Mason pulled it out, opened the camera. It's not ideal, but it's something. Charlotte moved aside. Mason started photographing the email, making sure to capture every line, every detail, the sender and recipient fields that proved this came from Harlow to Chen. The photos were grainy, low resolution from a cracked screen with terrible lighting, but they were readable. He'd gotten through 3 photos when his phone died. Damn it, Mason muttered. Charlotte grabbed the phone, tried to restart it. Nothing. Dead battery. They had partial documentation of the conspiracy email, but not all of it. We need to get out of here, Charlotte said. Before someone finds us, take what we have and what? Mason interrupted. Hope that 3 partial photos of an email are enough to convince a board that's already predisposed to believe Harlow? He shook his head. We need the whole thing. We need... Footsteps in the corridor. They both froze. The footsteps were coming closer. Slow. Methodical. Someone walking the floor, checking offices, doing what security should do at 4:30 in the morning. Mason grabbed Charlotte's hand and pulled her toward the door. If they could get to the corridor, get to the elevator, maybe they could... The office door opened. A man stood in the doorway. Late 50s, security uniform, the professional look of someone who'd been doing this job for 20 years and knew when something was wrong. His eyes went from Mason to Charlotte to the computer screen still showing Harlow's email. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His hand moved toward the radio on his belt. "Wait," Charlotte said, and Mason heard the CEO voice come back. Authoritative, commanding. "I'm Charlotte Vale. I own this building, and you're going to let us walk out of here." The security guard's hand stopped. He looked at Charlotte more carefully, taking in the baseball cap, the borrowed jacket, the expensive boots she still held in one hand. "Ms. Vale?" Confusion crossed his face. "We got a memo saying you were out of town, unavailable until further notice." "Who sent that memo?" "Mr. Harlow. Said you'd had a family emergency. Said not to expect you until next week at earliest." Charlotte and Mason exchanged a look. Another piece of the conspiracy, Harlow making sure that even if Charlotte showed up, security would think she wasn't supposed to be there. "Mr. Harlow lied," Charlotte said. "I never left town. Never had a family emergency, and right now I need to get into his office. Are you going to help me, or are you going to help him?" The security guard looked uncertain. "Ma'am, I don't know what's going on, but I can't just let you—" "There's a conspiracy happening in this building," Charlotte interrupted. "My CFO is planning to steal my company. I have evidence, proof, but I need more. And I need it in the next 3 hours before a board meeting that will decide whether I keep the company I built or lose everything to men who think they deserve it more." Her voice didn't waver. "Now, are you going to help me?" The security guard stared at her. Mason could see the calculation happening, duty versus conscience, rules versus what seemed right. "Show me your ID," the guard finally said. Charlotte pulled out her driver's license from somewhere in the borrowed jacket, handed it over. The guard studied it, compared the photo to Charlotte's face, handed it back. "Office is down the hall," he said. "Corner position. Door's probably locked, but I can override it." He paused. "You've got 10 minutes. After that, I have to report this. Company policy. 10 minutes is all I need." They followed the security guard to Harlow's office. He swiped a key card, punched in a code. The lock clicked open. "Thank you," Charlotte said. The guard nodded. "Timer starts now, Ms. Vale." He walked away. Mason and Charlotte stepped into Harlow's office and closed the door behind them. The space was exactly what Mason expected. Large, expensive, designed to impress. Windows overlooking the city, mahogany desk, leather chair that probably cost more than Mason's monthly rent, bookshelves lined with business texts and industry awards, and a laptop sitting open on the desk, screen glowing in sleep mode. Charlotte crossed to it immediately, tapped the spacebar. The screen came to life, showing a login prompt. "Locked," she said. "I need his password." Mason looked around the office. People who used the same password for everything usually wrote it down somewhere close. A notebook, a desk drawer. Somewhere they could reference it without making it obvious. He started searching, pulled open the top drawer, pens, business cards, a bottle of expensive scotch. Second drawer, files, contracts, nothing useful. Third drawer, a small leather notebook, the kind executives used for important notes. Mason flipped it open to the first page. System passwords written in neat handwriting. Email, network access, laptop login. "Got it," Mason said, reading off the laptop password. Charlotte typed it in. The screen unlocked. She navigated to Harlow's email, movements quick and precise. Mason watched over her shoulder as she pulled up sent messages, searching for anything related to the board, the conspiracy, the coup. There, dozens of emails, Harlow communicating with board members, with the executives who'd helped strand Charlotte, with contacts at competing firms who were apparently ready to make offers once the transition was complete. Evidence of embezzlement discussions, plans to manipulate financial reports, details about how they'd handle Charlotte if she tried to fight back, and a draft email scheduled to send at 8 o'clock that morning, 30 minutes before the board meeting. Subject line, "Formal recommendation for interim CEO." Charlotte opened it, read the contents. Mason saw her jaw tighten. The email laid out Harlow's case for why he should replace Charlotte as interim CEO, cited her recent erratic behavior, mentioned concerns about her judgment and stability, included falsified reports that made it look like she'd been making poor decisions for months. It was character assassination disguised as concern, and it was scheduled to hit every board member's inbox right before they voted on her future. "He's thorough," Charlotte said quietly. "I'll give him that. Can you forward these to yourself?" "If I do, it creates a record. Harlow will know someone accessed his account." Charlotte thought for a moment. "But if I'm going to blow this up anyway, might as well blow it up completely." She started forwarding emails. To her own account. To her lawyer. To 3 different board members she trusted. To the local news outlets that covered corporate scandals. "What are you doing?" Mason asked. "Making sure that even if Harlow destroys the evidence in his account, copies exist everywhere else. Making sure that when this explodes, it explodes big enough that he can't contain it." Charlotte kept clicking, kept forwarding. "He wanted to make me disappear? Fine. Let's see how he handles being exposed." Mason checked his watch. They'd been in the office for 8 minutes. 2 minutes left before the security guard had to report them. "Charlotte? Time. Almost done." She forwarded the last email, then pulled up Harlow's calendar. "I need to know what else he's got planned. What other—" The office door opened. Robert Harlow stood in the doorway. He was younger than Mason expected. Mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of handsome that came from good genetics and better skincare. His expression shifted from surprise to anger to cold calculation in the space of 3 seconds. "Charlotte," he said, "what a surprise." Charlotte stood slowly, moving away from the laptop. Mason positioned himself between her and Harlow, instinct overriding logic. "Robert," Charlotte said, and her voice was ice. "We need to talk." Apparently, Harlow stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. "I'm curious how you managed to get here. Last I checked, you were stranded in the industrial district with no phone and no transportation. Yet here you are, in my office, at my computer." "Last you checked?" Charlotte's voice sharpened. "Interesting phrasing. Almost like you knew where I was. Like you'd been tracking me." "I have no idea what you're talking about." "No? What about the emergency meeting last night? The one that didn't exist? The one where your driver conveniently disappeared while I was inside?" Harlow smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "That meeting was legitimate, client contract issue. Unfortunately resolved itself before you arrived. As for your driver, I'm not responsible for transportation logistics." "You're responsible for embezzling $700,000, Mason said. Harlow's attention shifted to him for the first time. "And you are?" "Nobody important, just someone who's good at finding financial discrepancies in legacy accounting systems." Something flickered in Harlow's expression. Worry, maybe, or recognition that the situation was more complicated than he'd anticipated. "I don't know what you think you found," Harlow said carefully, "but corporate accounting is complex. Anomalies happen. They mean you've been stealing from the company for 18 months, Charlotte interrupted. "And when you realized I might discover it, you decided the best defense was a good offense. Get rid of me before I could expose you." "That's a serious accusation." "I've got serious evidence. Your emails to board members, your plans for the emergency clause, your timeline for taking over my company." Charlotte gestured to the laptop. "All right there. All forwarded to people who'll make sure this doesn't stay quiet." Harlow's face went carefully blank. Mason recognized the expression. Someone doing rapid damage control, trying to figure out how much they could salvage from a situation that had just exploded. "If you've accessed my computer without authorization, that's illegal," Harlow said. "Corporate espionage. I could have you arrested." "Please do. I'd love to explain to the police why I needed to break into my own building to find proof that my CFO was committing fraud and conspiracy." Charlotte took a step forward. "Go ahead. Call them. Let's see who they believe." Harlow didn't move for his phone. Because he knew, Mason realized. Knew that the moment police got involved, this whole thing became public. Evidence would be examined, questions would be asked, and even if Harlow could explain away some of it, enough doubt would stick to ruin his reputation. "What do you want?" Harlow asked quietly. "I want you out," Charlotte said. "Resignation effective immediately. You leave the building, you don't attend the board meeting, and you don't contact anyone about this transition plan you've been cooking." "And if I refuse?" Then I expose everything, the embezzlement, the conspiracy, the emails. All of it goes public. You'll be finished, not just at Veil Technologies, everywhere. Who's going to hire a CFO who staged a corporate coup and stole from his own company? Harlow was quiet for a long moment. Mason could see him weighing options, calculating probabilities. This was a man who'd spent months planning a takeover. He wouldn't give up easily. You can't prove the embezzlement, Harlow finally said. Legacy system data isn't admissible. Any lawyer will tear it apart. Maybe. But I can prove the conspiracy. Your emails are proof enough. And once investigators start looking, once forensic accountants dig into the current system, they'll find what you've been hiding. Charlotte's voice was steady. You know they will. You know that given enough time and motivation, the truth comes out. Question is whether you want to fight this publicly or walk away quietly. If I walk away, I lose everything anyway. You lose your job, but you keep your freedom. You keep your reputation intact enough to rebuild somewhere else. Charlotte paused. That's more than you deserve. But it's what I'm offering, one time, right now. Mason watched the calculation happen in Harlow's expression. The man was cornered, and he knew it. Fight and risk criminal charges. Walk away and lose the company he'd tried to steal but survived to fight another day. I'll need severance, Harlow said. Contractually, I'm entitled— You're entitled to nothing, Charlotte snapped. You committed fraud, conspiracy, attempted corporate theft. Be grateful I'm not having you arrested. Then we have nothing to discuss. Harlow turned toward the door. Charlotte moved faster than Mason expected, positioning herself between Harlow and the exit. You walk out that door without agreeing to resign, and I make one phone call, Charlotte said. One call to my lawyer. One call to the SEC. One call to every news outlet in this city. By the time the board meeting starts in 3 hours, this entire conspiracy will be front-page news. Your face will be everywhere, and you'll spend the next year explaining to investigators why you thought staging a coup was a good idea. They stood there, Charlotte and Harlow, in a standoff that felt like it could tip either direction. Then Harlow laughed, sharp, bitter. You always were stubborn, he said. I told them you'd fight, told them you wouldn't just disappear quietly, but they insisted the plan would work. They? Charlotte asked. The board members, Chen, Weiss, Bradford, they wanted you gone as much as I did, said you were too cautious, too risk-averse, holding the company back. Harlow shrugged. I just gave them a way to make it happen. Mason saw Charlotte's expression shift. This was worse than she'd thought. Not just one executive going rogue. A coordinated effort from the people who were supposed to support her. Who else was involved? Charlotte asked quietly. Does it matter? You're asking me to resign. Once I'm gone, what difference does it make who else wanted you out? It matters because I need to know who I can trust. You can't trust anyone, Harlow said. That's the point. You built a company on the idea that success requires sacrifice. Well, congratulations. You sacrificed so much that nobody wanted to work for you anymore. Nobody wanted to follow someone who treated them like chess pieces instead of people. Charlotte didn't respond, but Mason saw something crack in her expression. My resignation, Harlow continued, in exchange for your silence about the embezzlement. I'll tell the board I'm leaving for personal reasons. You don't mention the missing money. We both walk away. That's the deal, Harlow interrupted. Take it, or watch this turn into a legal battle that destroys both of us. Because even if you win, Charlotte, even if you prove everything, you'll still be the CEO who drove her executives to conspiracy, who created a culture toxic enough that people would rather commit crimes than keep working for you. He paused. How's that going to look to investors, to clients, to the board members who weren't involved but will start wondering if maybe you were the problem all along? Mason wanted to argue. Wanted to tell Harlow that none of this was Charlotte's fault, that betrayal was betrayal regardless of management style. But he also recognized manipulation when he heard it. Harlow was cornered, so he was lashing out, trying to make Charlotte doubt herself enough to accept a bad deal. No, Charlotte said. You don't get to reframe this. You stole from the company. You staged a conspiracy. You tried to destroy me. And now you want to walk away like you're the victim? She shook her head. I'm not protecting you. You resign and I report the embezzlement. Both happen. That's the deal. Then you're a fool. Maybe. But I'm a fool who's about to expose you. Harlow stared at her. Then he pulled out his phone. What are you doing? Mason asked. Calling Chen, Weiss, Bradford, everyone involved. Harlow's finger hovered over the screen. If you're going to blow this up, Charlotte, I'm taking everyone down with me. Let's see how the board feels about your leadership when they find out half of them wanted you gone." Charlotte's face went pale. Because Harlow was right, Mason realized. If this became public, if the full scope of the conspiracy came out, it wouldn't just destroy Harlow. It would destroy the company. Investors would panic, clients would leave, the board would collapse. Everything Charlotte had built would fall apart, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because the damage would be too extensive to survive. "You're bluffing," Charlotte said, but her voice wavered. "Try me." Harlow's thumb moved toward the call button. Mason grabbed Charlotte's arm. "We need to go." "What?" "Now, before this gets worse." Mason pulled her toward the door. "We've got what we came for. We've got proof. Let's get out of here and figure out the next move somewhere that isn't his office." Charlotte resisted for a second. Then something in her expression shifted, calculation replacing anger, and she let Mason pull her out of Harlow's office and down the corridor toward the elevator. Behind them, Harlow called out, "You can't run from this, Charlotte. No matter where you go, this follows you." They didn't look back. The elevator arrived. They stepped inside. Mason hit the button for the ground floor and watched the doors close on Harlow, standing in the corridor, phone still in his hand, expression unreadable. "I should have taken the deal," Charlotte said quietly. "What deal? His resignation for your silence?" "Yes. At least that would have ended it. Now he's going to call everyone. Warn them. By the time we get to the board meeting, they'll have a coordinated story. We'll walk into an ambush." Mason didn't disagree, but he also knew that accepting Harlow's deal would have meant letting a thief walk away unpunished, would have meant protecting someone who'd tried to destroy her. "We still have the emails," Mason said. "The evidence you forwarded. That doesn't go away just because Harlow's making calls. Evidence he'll claim was taken illegally, accessed without authorization. Any lawyer will get it thrown out. In court, maybe. But this isn't about court. It's about the board. About making them see what really happened." Mason looked at her. "You've got 3 hours until that meeting. 3 hours to decide how to play this. Whether to go in fighting or what? Surrender? Let Harlow win? Or think strategically instead of emotionally?" The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened onto the loading dock where they'd entered. Empty. No security. No witnesses. They walked back through the service corridor, past the supply closets and equipment rooms, toward the exit to the street. Charlotte had gone quiet, lost in whatever calculations were happening behind her eyes. Outside, the snow had eased slightly. Still falling, but gentler now. The city was starting to wake up. Distant sounds of plows, early traffic, the beginnings of a day that would decide Charlotte's fate. Mason's van was where they'd left it, covered in a fresh layer of white. He brushed off the windshield while Charlotte climbed into the passenger seat. When he got in, she was crying again. Quiet. Controlled. But definitely crying. "I don't know what to do," she said. "For the first time in 10 years, I genuinely don't know what to do." Mason started the engine, let it warm up, thought about everything they'd learned in the last hour. "You've got options," he said finally. "Like what?" "Option 1. Go to the board meeting, present the evidence, force them to choose between you and Harlow. High risk, high reward. If it works, you win everything. If it doesn't, you lose everything." "What's option 2? "Walk away. Let Harlow have the company. Start over somewhere else." Mason looked at her. "You're smart, capable, proven track record. You could build another company. Maybe a better one." "That's not... I can't just..." Charlotte stopped. "Veil Technologies is mine. I built it, sacrificed for it. I can't just give it to someone who stole it." "Then option 1 it is." "But you heard what Harlow said. He's calling everyone, warning them. By the time I get to that meeting, they'll have a unified front. They'll make me look paranoid, unstable. They'll use my own evidence against me." Mason drove slowly through the empty streets, thinking. There had to be an angle they weren't seeing, some way to turn this around. "What if you didn't go alone?" he asked. Charlotte looked at him. "What?" "To the board meeting. What if you brought someone with you, someone who could corroborate your story, verify that the conspiracy was real?" "Like who? You? Why not? I'm the one who found the financial discrepancies, who helped access Harlow's emails, who saw everything that happened tonight." Mason glanced at her. "I'm a neutral third party, No stake in the company. No reason to lie. If I tell the board what we found, that carries weight. It also makes you a target. Harlow will claim you illegally accessed private systems. You could face charges. Maybe, but if it means you keep your company, might be worth it. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. Why are you doing this? She asked. Helping me. Risking your own freedom. You barely know me. You don't owe me anything. Mason thought about how to answer that. About Sarah and the neighbor who'd called 911. About strangers who decided to care when they didn't have to. About the difference between standing by and standing up. 6 years ago, when my wife collapsed, a neighbor heard it through the wall. Could have ignored it. Could have assumed it wasn't their problem. Instead, they called for help. That choice gave me and my daughter time to say goodbye. Gave us something we wouldn't have had otherwise. He looked at Charlotte. I can't pay that back to the neighbor. They moved away years ago. But I can pay it forward. To someone else who needs help. To you. Charlotte didn't say anything, but she reached over and squeezed his hand once, brief and tight, before pulling away. They drove back toward Mason's apartment in silence. The city was lighter now, dawn starting to break through the clouds. In 2 hours, people would be having breakfast, going to work, living normal lives. In 2 hours, Charlotte would be fighting for her company, and Mason would be there, whether it made sense or not, whether it was smart or reckless or completely insane, because some things mattered more than safety. The apartment was exactly as they'd left it, Ava's unfinished lighthouse puzzle on the coffee table, the dim lamp still glowing, morning light starting to creep through the curtains. Mason checked his watch. 6:47. Less than 2 hours until the board meeting that would decide everything. Charlotte stood in the middle of the living room like she didn't quite know what to do with herself. Still wearing his jacket, still holding her expensive boots. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting too long with too little hope of winning. You should eat something, Mason said, heading to the kitchen. When's the last time you had food? Charlotte thought about it. Yesterday, lunch, maybe, I don't remember. Mason opened the refrigerator. The contents were depressing. Half a gallon of milk, some leftover takeout that was probably questionable, eggs that might be okay, bread for toast. Not exactly the kind of meal a CEO was used to. I can do eggs, he offered. Or toast. Or both if you're feeling ambitious. I'm not hungry. You need to eat anyway. Can't fight a corporate coup on an empty stomach. Mason pulled out the eggs. Trust me on this. He heard Charlotte sit down at the kitchen table behind him. Heard her put the boots on the floor with a soft thud. When he glanced back, she was staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. Mason cracked 4 eggs into a bowl, added milk, started scrambling. The routine was familiar, comforting even. This was something he knew how to do. Feed people. Take care of basic needs while the world fell apart around them. I keep thinking about what Harlow said, Charlotte spoke quietly. About how I drove them to this. About creating a culture where people would rather commit crimes than keep working for me. He was manipulating you. Was he, though? Charlotte looked up. Be honest. You've seen how I operate. How I talk about sacrifice and success. How I built a company on the idea that work comes first, always. She paused. What kind of leader does that make me? Mason poured the eggs into a heated pan, watched them start to solidify. He thought about how to answer that without either lying or making things worse. I think you built something impressive, he said finally. $1 billion company from nothing. That doesn't happen by accident. Takes vision, dedication, work ethic that most people don't have. He stirred the eggs. But I also think you're right that sacrifice has costs. Question is whether those costs were worth it. They weren't. Charlotte's voice was flat. I sacrificed relationships, personal life, sleep, health, convinced myself it was necessary, that success required giving up everything else. She laughed, bitter. And look where it got me. Alone at a bus stop with nobody who cared enough to answer their phone. Harlow didn't answer because he wanted you stranded, not because you're not worth caring about. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, the results look the same. Mason plated the eggs, added toast from the toaster, set the food in front of Charlotte. She stared at it like she'd forgotten what breakfast was supposed to look like. Eat, Mason said, sitting down across from her with his own plate. We can philosophize about leadership styles after you've got food in you. Charlotte picked up a fork. took a small bite, then another. Mason watched her eat and understood that she was running on fumes. Body and mind both stretched past their limits, held together only by sheer determination and the desperate need to not give up. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Outside, the city was waking up properly now. Sounds of traffic, distant voices, the rhythmic scrape of someone shoveling their walkway. Normal life continuing while Charlotte's world hung in the balance. "I need to prepare," Charlotte said, pushing her half-finished plate away. "For the meeting. Need to figure out what I'm going to say, how I'm going to present the evidence, what order to—" "Charlotte," Mason interrupted gently. "Stop." "Stop what?" "Stop trying to control everything. You've been doing that all night. Planning, strategizing, trying to think 3 moves ahead, and it's exhausting you." He leaned forward. "You've got the evidence. You've got the truth. That's enough. The rest is just execution. Execution is everything. If I walk in there without a clear plan, then you improvise, like you've been doing since 1 in the morning when you were sitting at that bus stop." Mason met her eyes. "You're good at this, at thinking on your feet, at fighting when everything's against you. Trust that." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then, "What if I lose?" "Then you lose, and you figure out what comes next." "That easy?" "I didn't say easy. I said that's what happens." Mason stood and started clearing plates. "You want to know what I learned after Sarah died? That you can plan for everything, prepare for every contingency, try to control every variable. And life will still surprise you, still throw things at you that don't fit your strategy." He ran water in the sink. "Best you can do is show up and deal with what's actually happening instead of what you think might happen." Charlotte stood too, walked to the window, looked out at the snow-covered parking lot where Mason's van sat like a monument to poor financial decisions. "I'm scared," she said quietly. Mason turned off the water. "I know. Not just about losing the company, about what comes after. Who I am if I'm not CEO of Veil Technologies, what I do with myself, where I go." She pressed her fingers against the cold glass. "I've spent 10 years being this person, this version of myself that's defined by success, by achievement, by building something that matters. Take that away and I don't know what's left." Mason dried his hands and walked over to stand beside her. Outside, a couple was walking their dog through the snow. The dog kept trying to eat it, tail wagging like this was the best morning of its life. "You know what I was scared of after Sarah died?" Mason asked. "That I'd forget her. That time would pass and my memories would fade, and eventually I wouldn't be able to remember what her voice sounded like, or how she laughed, or the way she used to dance in the kitchen when she thought nobody was watching." He watched the dog jump into a snowdrift. "But that's not what happened. What happened is she became part of everything, part of how I raise Ava, part of the choices I make, part of who I am now." He looked at Charlotte. "You're not just your job. You're the person who built that job. The skills, the intelligence, the determination, those don't go away if the company does." "What amount is some person?" Charlotte didn't respond. But Mason saw her jaw tighten, saw her straighten slightly. Small changes. But changes. "What time do I need to be there?" she asked. "Meeting starts at 8:30, but you should get there early. Make them wait for you instead of the other way around." "So 8:15. 8 o'clock, Mason corrected. "Walk in like you own the place. Because you do." Charlotte almost smiled. "You're coming with me? Unless you've changed your mind about wanting a witness." "I haven't." She turned to face him fully. "But Mason, this could get messy. Harlow's going to accuse you of helping me break into his computer, of corporate espionage, I know the risks. Do you? Because you've got a daughter to think about. And if this goes wrong, if you end up facing charges—" "Then I'll deal with it," Mason interrupted. "Same way I've dealt with everything else. One problem at a time." He checked his watch. 7:03. "You should get cleaned up. Use the bathroom. There's a shower if you want it. Towels under the sink." Charlotte looked down at herself. Rumpled clothes, borrowed jacket, face that probably hadn't seen a mirror in 12 hours. "I can't walk into a board meeting looking like this." "Why not? You survived a conspiracy. Spent the night fighting to save your company. Little rough around the edges seems appropriate. The board expects you to be missing. Dead, maybe. Definitely not there to fight back." Mason gestured toward the bathroom. Show up looking like you've been through hell. Lets them know exactly what they put you through. Charlotte considered that, then nodded slowly. Okay, but I at least need to wash my face, brush my teeth if you've got a spare toothbrush. Cabinet under the sink. Help yourself. She disappeared into the bathroom. Mason heard water running, the sounds of someone trying to make themselves presentable with limited resources. He walked to Ava's room, cracked the door to check on her. Still asleep, curled up with Mr. Carrot, peaceful in a way that made his chest tight. He'd be back before she woke up. Probably. If the board meeting didn't turn into a disaster, if Harlow didn't have them arrested, if any of the 17 things that could go wrong didn't actually go wrong. Mason closed the door quietly and went back to the living room, pulled out his phone charger, plugged in his dead phone. It would take a while to charge enough to be useful, but at least it was something. Charlotte emerged from the bathroom 10 minutes later. She'd washed her face, pulled her hair back into something resembling professional, ditched his jacket in favor of her own expensive coat. Still looked tired. Still looked like someone who'd been awake for 30 hours, but more pulled together. More like the CEO he'd seen in magazine photos. Better? She asked. You look ready. I don't feel ready. Nobody ever does. Mason grabbed his keys. Come on, let's go save your company. They took the van again because Charlotte's car was still wherever Harlow's people had left it, and calling for transportation would create records, alerts, evidence that she'd been mobile and capable of attending the meeting. Better to arrive in a delivery van than give Harlow ammunition to claim she'd been available all along. The drive downtown was quiet. Charlotte stared out the window, lost in whatever mental preparation she was doing. Mason navigated through morning traffic. Heavier now, rush hour starting, the city returning to normal after the storm. Vale Tower looked different in daylight. Less imposing somehow. Just another glass building in a city full of glass buildings. But Mason could see the tension in Charlotte's posture as they got closer, the way her hands clenched and unclenched in her lap. What if they've already voted? She asked suddenly. What if Harlow convinced them to start early? What if... Then we deal with it. Mason pulled into the same parking garage from before. But we can't control that. We can only control what we do next. He parked on the third level this time. Less conspicuous, easier exit if they needed to leave quickly. They got out into the cold concrete structure, footsteps echoing off the walls. Charlotte pulled out a compact mirror from somewhere, checked her reflection one last time, snapped it shut, took a deep breath. Okay, she said. I'm ready. They walked to the street entrance together. The main lobby of Vale Tower was busy at this hour, employees arriving, security checking IDs, coffee cart doing brisk business. Mason stayed close to Charlotte as they crossed to the elevator bank. A security guard looked up as they approached. His eyes went from Charlotte to Mason and back again, confusion crossing his face. Ms. Vale, we weren't expecting you this morning. Mr. Harlow sent a memo saying... Mr. Harlow was mistaken, Charlotte said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who wouldn't be questioned. I need to get to the executive floor. Now. The guard hesitated, reached for his radio. Don't, Charlotte said sharply. I'm the CEO of this company. I don't need permission to enter my own building. Are you going to let me pass, or are we going to have a problem? The guard looked uncertain, but he stepped aside. Charlotte and Mason walked to the executive elevator, the one that required keycard access to reach the top floors. Charlotte swiped her card. Mason half expected it not to work, expected Harlow to have deactivated it. But the light turned green. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. Charlotte pressed 42. As the doors closed, Mason saw the security guard speaking urgently into his radio, alerting someone. Probably Harlow. Probably the board. Within minutes, everyone would know Charlotte Vale had arrived. Good, Mason thought. Let them panic. The elevator climbed. Charlotte was breathing carefully, controlled. The kind of breathing people did when they were trying not to hyperventilate. You've got this, Mason said quietly. Charlotte nodded. Didn't speak. Just nodded. The elevator chimed. 42nd floor. The doors opened onto chaos. The reception area was full of people, board members in expensive suits, Harlow standing near the conference room door, phone pressed to his ear, 3 people who looked like lawyers carrying briefcases, and someone from building security hovering near the hallway like they weren't sure what their job was anymore. Everyone stopped talking when Charlotte stepped out of the elevator. The silence was absolute. Mason watched them take her in. The rumpled clothes, the exhausted face, the fact that she was there at all when she was supposed to be missing, stranded, disappeared. Harlow recovered first. He lowered his phone slowly, expression carefully neutral. "Charlotte," he said. "What a surprise. We were worried about you." "Were you?" Charlotte's voice was ice. "How worried exactly? Worried enough to answer your phone last night? Worried enough to send someone to find me? Or just worried that I might show up and ruin your carefully planned coup?" Murmurs from the board members. Mason saw them exchange glances, uncertainty rippling through the group. An older man in an expensive suit stepped forward. Mason recognized him from Charlotte's descriptions. David Chen, head of the audit committee, one of Harlow's allies. "Ms. Vale, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," Chen said smoothly. "We received notification that you had a family emergency, that you'd be unavailable for several days. When you didn't respond to meeting notifications, we assumed—" "You assumed wrong," Charlotte interrupted. "There was no family emergency, no unavailability. Just a CFO who staged an elaborate conspiracy to make me disappear long enough to trigger the emergency succession clause." She looked directly at Harlow. "Want to tell them about the fake meeting last night, Robert? The stranded car? The unanswered phone calls?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," Harlow said calmly. "You're clearly under a great deal of stress. Perhaps we should postpone the board meeting until you've had time to rest. Collect yourself." "I'm perfectly collected." Charlotte walked further into the reception area. Mason followed, staying close but not too close. Witness, not bodyguard. "And I have evidence of everything. Emails from your account detailing the conspiracy, financial records showing 18 months of embezzlement, communications with board members where you planned exactly how to remove me and install yourself as CEO." More murmurs, louder now. Chen's expression had shifted from smooth confidence to careful wariness. "Those are serious accusations," another board member said. "Margaret Weiss, probably. Late 50s, severe haircut, the look of someone who didn't tolerate nonsense. Do you have proof?" "I do. Forwarded to my personal email, my attorney, and 3 journalists as of 5 o'clock this morning." Charlotte pulled out her phone. She must have gotten it charged somehow, Mason realized, and started scrolling. "Happy to share the emails right now if you'd like, or we can discuss them in the board meeting where they belong." "This is ridiculous," Harlow said, but Mason heard the edge in his voice now, stress cracking through the calm exterior. "You're making wild claims based on illegally accessed data. I could have you arrested for corporate espionage." "Please do," Charlotte said. "I'd love to explain to the police why I needed to access my own CFO's email to discover that he was stealing from my company and planning to overthrow me. I'm sure they'd find that fascinating." "Who is he?" Chen asked, gesturing at Mason. "Another employee? A lawyer?" "I'm nobody," Mason said before Charlotte could answer. "Just someone who found Ms. Vale stranded at a bus stop at 1 in the morning and decided to help. Turned out she needed more help than I expected." "A good Samaritan," Harlow said, and the way he said it made it sound like an accusation. "How convenient. A random stranger who just happens to help the CEO break into private systems and steal confidential information." "I didn't steal anything," Mason said evenly. "I helped someone access evidence that her employees were conspiring against her." "Big difference." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you're an accomplice to corporate espionage. From where I'm standing, you're a thief trying to avoid accountability." Harlow's face flushed red. He took a step toward Mason, and for a second Mason thought the CFO might actually take a swing at him, but Charlotte moved between them. "Enough," she said. "We're not doing this in the reception area. The board meeting is scheduled for 8:30. It's—" She checked her phone. 8:12. "I suggest we all go to the conference room and discuss this like professionals, instead of staging a confrontation in front of the entire executive floor." She was right. Mason noticed that employees had started gathering in the hallway, watching the scene unfold. Phones were out. Video was probably being recorded. Whatever happened next would be documented, shared, impossible to deny later. Chen looked at the other board members. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. Then he nodded. "Conference room," he said. "We'll discuss this properly." The group moved toward the executive conference room, the same room where Mason and Charlotte had overheard Harlow planning the coup hours earlier. Board members filed in first. Then Harlow, shooting Charlotte a look that promised this wasn't over. Then Charlotte. Mason started to follow, but one of the lawyers stopped him. Board members and relevant executives only, the lawyer said. You'll need to wait outside. He's my witness, Charlotte said from the doorway. He stays. Ms. Vale, this is a closed board session. We can't allow... Then we'll make an exception. Charlotte's voice had gone hard. CEO mode fully engaged. Mr. Reed witnessed the events of last night, helped uncover the evidence of conspiracy and embezzlement. His testimony is relevant to this discussion. He stays or I walk out right now and we have this conversation through lawyers instead. The board members looked at each other again. More silent communication. Mason got the sense that nobody quite knew what the rules were anymore. What was allowed, what made sense in a situation that had already gone completely off the rails. Fine, Chen said finally. He can observe, but this is highly irregular. So is staging a corporate coup, Charlotte said. I think we're past worrying about irregular. Mason followed Charlotte into the conference room. It was exactly what he expected. Long mahogany table, leather chairs, windows overlooking the city, abstract art that probably cost 6 figures. The kind of room where important decisions got made by people who'd never worried about making rent. Charlotte took the chair at the head of the table. Her chair. The CEO's position. Harlow had been moving toward it, but he stopped when he saw Charlotte sit down. For a second, rage flashed across his face. Then the careful, neutral mask returned. The board members arranged themselves around the table. Harlow sat at the opposite end from Charlotte, as far away as the geography allowed. Mason found a chair against the wall, out of the way but close enough to hear everything. Chen cleared his throat. Before we begin, I think we need to address the accusations Ms. Vale has made. Robert, do you want to respond? Happy to. Harlow leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. Reasonable, calm, like they were discussing quarterly projections instead of conspiracy. Ms. Vale has been under enormous stress lately. Poor sleep, erratic decisions. Several members of the executive team have expressed concerns about her judgment. He looked around the table. Last night, we had a legitimate emergency meeting regarding a client contract issue. When it resolved itself, I personally ensured Ms. Vale was informed. Her car service was scheduled to pick her up. If there was confusion about transportation, that's unfortunate. But it's not conspiracy. That's a lie, Charlotte said flatly. It's documented, Harlow countered. I have emails confirming the meeting, the car service request, the timeline of events, all of which I'm happy to share. Emails you created after the fact to cover your tracks, or emails that show exactly what happened and undermine your paranoid accusations. Harlow's voice sharpened. Charlotte, you disappeared for 8 hours, didn't respond to calls, didn't check your email, didn't contact anyone to let them know you were safe. And now you show up making wild claims about conspiracies and embezzlement, accompanied by a stranger you apparently met at a bus stop. He shook his head. This is exactly the kind of erratic behavior we've been concerned about. Margaret Weiss spoke up. Ms. Vale, where were you between 11 p.m. last night and this morning? Charlotte took a breath. Mason could see her choosing her words carefully. I was stranded, she said. Deliberately stranded by executives who wanted me to miss this meeting. My phone died. My car service abandoned me. Nobody answered when I called for help because they'd been instructed not to. She looked at Harlow. It was coordinated, planned, designed to trigger the emergency succession clause that would make Robert interim CEO. Do you have proof of this coordination? Chen asked. I have Robert's emails to board members discussing the succession plan. I have financial records showing embezzlement. I have illegally obtained evidence, Harlow interrupted. Evidence she stole by accessing my computer without authorization. With the help of, he gestured at Mason, an accomplice she'd just met, which raises questions about judgment, about stability, about whether Ms. Vale is fit to continue as CEO. The board members were listening, but Mason saw doubt in their expressions, saw them weighing Harlow's calm, reasonable explanation against Charlotte's accusations, and he understood with sinking certainty that this wasn't going well. Charlotte was fighting from a position of weakness. She'd broken into Harlow's office, accessed his computer, taken information that could be framed as theft, and Harlow was using that against her, making her look desperate and unstable instead of victimized and fighting back. The emails exist regardless of how I obtained them, Charlotte said. You want to argue about legality? Fine. We can do that later. But right now, you need to see what Robert's been planning, what he's been stealing, what he... Show us, Weiss said. Charlotte pulled out her phone, started scrolling, found what she was looking for, and slid the phone across the table to Weiss. Weiss read. Her expression didn't change. She passed the phone to Chen, who also read with the same neutral face. The phone made its way around the table while Charlotte and Harlow stared at each other across the mahogany expanse. When the phone came back to Charlotte, Chen spoke. "These emails are concerning," he said carefully, "if authentic. But as Robert pointed out, the method of obtaining them raises questions. We'd need to verify the data, ensure it hasn't been tampered with, consult with legal counsel about admissibility." "You want to verify them?" Charlotte's voice rose. "Pull up Robert's sent folder right now. Check his account. The emails are there." "My account was accessed without authorization," Harlow said. "Who's to say what was added, changed, or fabricated while Ms. Vale had access?" "I didn't fabricate anything." "Prove it." They were at an impasse. Mason saw it clearly. Charlotte had evidence but couldn't prove it was legitimate. Harlow had explanations that sounded reasonable if you didn't look too closely, and the board was caught in the middle, uncertain, unwilling to commit to either side. "What about the embezzlement?" Mason said from his chair against the wall. Everyone turned to look at him. He probably shouldn't have spoken. Wasn't his place. But watching Charlotte lose ground while Harlow lied was worse than breaking protocol. "The financial discrepancies Ms. Vale mentioned," Mason continued. $700,000 moved through consulting fees and expense adjustments over 18 months. Those aren't in Robert's email. Those are in Vale Technologies' accounting system, legacy database. Anyone can access it. Anyone can verify it's real. Harlow's expression tightened. Legacy systems are notoriously unreliable. Glitches, corrupted data. Nobody uses that information for actual financial decisions anymore. Which makes it perfect for hiding embezzlement, Mason said. Because nobody's looking there, nobody's checking. You could move money for months, and as long as the current system balanced, nobody would notice. He looked at Chen. "You're head of the audit committee. When's the last time you ran a comparison between legacy records and current accounts? Checked for discrepancies?" Chen hesitated. "We focus our audits on current data. Legacy systems are archived for historical reference, but not—" "Then maybe you should check," Mason interrupted. "Pull up the legacy database right now. Compare it to current records. See if $700,000 went missing." "That's not how audits work," Harlow said quickly. "You don't just pull random data and make accusations. There's process, protocol, proper forensic accounting that takes weeks, not minutes." "Sounds like someone who doesn't want us looking too closely," Charlotte said. "Sounds like someone who understands basic financial oversight," Harlow shot back. "Enough." Weiss stood up. "This meeting is degenerating into accusations and counter-accusations without resolution. I move that we table the succession vote until we can properly investigate these claims. Get forensic accountants involved. Review the evidence through proper legal channels. Make informed decisions instead of reactive ones." "Second," another board member said. "James Bradford, probably. The former CEO who'd never forgiven Charlotte for acquiring his company." Chen looked around the table. "All in favor of tabling the vote?" 4 hands went up. Weiss, Bradford, Chen, and Patricia Oakes. "Opposed?" 3 hands. The board members Mason didn't recognize. Charlotte's allies, maybe. Or just people who wanted more information before deciding. "Motion carries," Chen said. "We'll reconvene once we have verified data and legal guidance. In the meantime," he looked at Charlotte, then at Harlow, "both of you will continue in your current positions. No changes to company structure until this is resolved." Charlotte's face had gone pale. "You're leaving Robert in place? After everything I've told you? After the evidence I've shown you? We're leaving both of you in place," Chen corrected. "Innocent until proven guilty. Due process. If the accusations are true, appropriate action will be taken. But we're not making rash decisions based on incomplete information." "This is exactly what he wanted," Charlotte said quietly. "Delay? Investigation. Time to cover his tracks. By the time your forensic accountants find anything, the evidence will be gone. Hidden. Destroyed." "Then you should have thought of that before accessing systems illegally," Harlow said. "Actions have consequences, Charlotte, even for CEOs." Charlotte stood abruptly. Her chair scraped back loudly against the floor. "This meeting is over." "Charlotte," Chen started. "I said it's over. You want to investigate? Fine. Investigate. But I'm done justifying myself to people who've already decided I'm the problem." She looked at each board member in turn. "Robert staged a conspiracy to remove me. He embezzled from this company. He orchestrated everything that happened last night. And when the truth comes out, when your investigation proves what I've been saying, I'm going to remember which of you believed him over me." She walked out. Mason stood and followed, leaving the board members staring after them in shocked silence. In the corridor outside, Charlotte was shaking, rage or fear or both. Mason steered her toward the elevator, away from the conference room, away from the board members and Harlow and the entire disaster that meeting had become. "I lost," Charlotte said as they waited for the elevator. "I had evidence, had proof, and I still lost." "You didn't lose. They tabled the vote. It means Harlow gets time to destroy evidence while they investigate, gets time to convince board members that I'm unstable, gets time to win." Charlotte pressed her palms against her eyes. "I should have accepted his deal, resignation for silence. At least that would have gotten rid of him." The elevator arrived. They stepped inside. Mason hit the button for the lobby and watched Charlotte try to hold herself together as the doors closed. "What happens now?" Mason asked. "Now? Now I go back to work like nothing happened, smile at employees, attend meetings, pretend I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop." Charlotte lowered her hands. Her eyes were red but dry. "And I wait for the investigation that will take weeks while Harlow spends every day undermining me. Perfect." The elevator descended in silence. Mason didn't know what to say. Didn't have words that would make this better, or solutions that would fix the fundamental problem that corporate conspiracies were hard to prove and easy to deny. They reached the lobby, stepped out into the morning rush of employees arriving for work. People who didn't know their CEO had just fought for her company and lost. People who thought today was just another Tuesday. Charlotte walked toward the exit, head high, posture perfect. Mason followed her out into the cold morning air. The snow had stopped completely now, sun breaking through clouds. The city looked almost beautiful in the aftermath of the storm, everything covered in white, pristine, and temporary. "Thank you," Charlotte said quietly, "for helping, for being there, for—" She stopped. "I know it didn't work, but thank you for trying. It's not over yet." "Yes, it is. The board made their choice. They chose process over truth, procedure over justice. And by the time they finish investigating, Harlow will have won." Charlotte turned to face him. "You should go home. Get back to your daughter. Forget this ever happened." "Charlotte, I mean it, Mason. This is going to get ugly. Lawyers, depositions, maybe criminal charges for how we accessed Harlow's computer. You don't need that in your life. You've got Ava to think about. She was right. Mason knew she was right. The smart thing was to walk away, go back to his apartment, make Ava pancakes, return to the simple, difficult, manageable life he'd built from the wreckage of losing Sarah. But he looked at Charlotte standing in the snow outside Vale Tower, exhausted, defeated, alone, and couldn't make himself leave. "What are you going to do?" he asked. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. Then she straightened. Something shifted in her expression, defeat replaced by determination. "I'm going to fight," she said. "Harlow wants time to destroy evidence? Fine. I'll spend that time finding more. Want to make me look unstable? I'll show them what stable looks like. Want to undermine me with board members? I'll rebuild those relationships one conversation at a time." She met Mason's eyes. "I built this company once. I can fight for it now. And I'm not giving up just because one meeting didn't go my way." Mason felt something loosen in his chest. Relief, maybe. A recognition of the kind of stubbornness that refused to accept defeat even when defeat looked inevitable. "Okay," he said. "Then let's figure out next steps." "Next steps are mine to handle." Charlotte pulled her coat tighter. "You've done enough, more than enough. Go home to Ava. I'll handle the rest." But even as she said it, Mason saw the fear underneath, saw the knowledge that she was walking back into Vale Tower to face Harlow alone, to fight a battle she wasn't sure she could win, to keep pretending everything was fine while her world fell apart. And he made a decision. "Give me your number," Mason said. Charlotte blinked. "What?" "Your phone number, so I can call you, check in, make sure Harlow hasn't tried something else." "Mason, you don't need to—" "I know I don't need to, I want to." He pulled out his phone, now partially charged from the brief time plugged in at his apartment. "What's your number?" Charlotte recited it. Mason saved it to his contacts, then sent her a text so she'd have his. "There," he said. "Now if something happens, if you need help, you can call someone who'll actually answer." Charlotte looked at her phone. at the text from an unknown number that just said, "It's Mason." Then she looked up at him, and for the first time that morning, she almost smiled. "Thank you," she said again. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this is over and you've still got your company. And if I don't? Then thank me anyway." For giving a damn when most people wouldn't. They stood there at the cold for another moment. Two people from completely different worlds who'd been thrown together by chance and circumstance, and a delivery driver's decision to stop at a bus stop when he should have kept driving. Then Charlotte turned and walked back into Vale Tower. Back to the fight. Back to whatever came next. And Mason walked to his van, climbed inside, and sat in the cold quiet for 5 minutes before starting the engine. His phone buzzed. Text from Ava's school. "Early dismissal today due to snow cleanup. Please pick up by noon." Mason checked the time. 9:47. He had 2 hours. He started the van and headed home through streets that were clearing, past businesses opening, into a city that was moving forward whether Charlotte's world was falling apart or not. When he got to the apartment, Ava was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, still in her pajamas. "You left early," she said. "Had to help Charlotte with her work stuff. Remember her? The sad lady with the fancy coat." "Yeah. Her." Mason sat down across from Ava. "She's having a hard time. People at her job are being mean." Ava thought about that, spoon halfway to her mouth. "Like when Jessie took my crayons and said they were hers. Kind of like that, but bigger, more complicated." "Are you going to help her get them back?" Mason looked at his daughter, 6 years old, gap-toothed, wearing mismatched pajamas, and asking questions that cut straight to the heart of things. "I'm trying," he said. "Good." Ava went back to her cereal. "Stealing is bad. She should get her stuff back." "Yeah, she should." Mason's phone buzzed again. Another text. But this one wasn't from the school. It was from Charlotte. "Harlow just called an emergency executive meeting. Something's happening. I don't know what, but it's not good." Mason stared at the message. Thought about Ava and school pickup and pancakes he'd promised to make. Thought about the smart, safe choice to stay out of corporate conspiracies that weren't his problem. Then he texted back, "Want me there?" The response came immediately, "Yes." Mason looked at Ava. "Hey, sweetheart, how would you feel about going to Emma's house for a few hours? Her mom said you could come over any time." Ava's eyes lit up. "Can we bring my new coloring book?" "Absolutely." 20 minutes later, Ava was safely delivered to Emma's house with promises of being picked up by noon for the school's early dismissal. Mason was back in his van, heading downtown again toward Vale Tower and Charlotte and whatever Harlow had planned next, because some things mattered more than smart choices. And sometimes the only thing you could do was show up and fight, even when you didn't know if fighting would make any difference at all. Mason made it back to Vale Tower by 10:30. The lobby was busier now, mid-morning energy, people moving with purpose between meetings and conference calls. He felt out of place in his delivery driver clothes, but nobody gave him a second look. Invisible again. Just another working person passing through a building full of them. He texted Charlotte, "I'm here. Where are you?" The response came fast. "Executive floor, small conference room. Don't come up. Harlow's watching everything." Mason hesitated, then typed, "What's happening?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "He's forcing me out. Found some clause in my contract. Meeting with HR and legal now. I think this is it." Mason read the message twice. Thought about corporate contracts and legal loopholes and all the ways someone like Harlow could weaponize bureaucracy against someone he wanted gone. Thought about Charlotte up there alone, fighting battles she'd been fighting all night, running on no sleep in desperation. He typed, "I'm coming up anyway." "No, stay there. If you come up here, Harlow will use it against me. Say I'm bringing in unauthorized people, compromising confidential meetings. So what am I supposed to do? Just wait?" "Yes. Please. Just wait." Mason shoved his phone in his pocket and paced the lobby. He felt useless down here. Worse than useless. Charlotte was fighting for her company 42 floors above him, and he was standing in a lobby checking his phone like that would somehow help. He found a coffee shop in the building's ground floor, ordered something that cost too much and tasted like burnt water, sat at a table near the window where he could watch the elevator banks and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. His phone buzzed, text from Emma's mom. "Ava's doing great. Don't rush. We're making cookies." Mason sent back a thank you and felt guilty for dragging his daughter into this mess, for leaving her with neighbors while he played hero for a CEO he'd met 12 hours ago. Sarah would have called him an idiot, would have pointed out that he had responsibilities, a child to raise, bills that wouldn't pay themselves, would have been right about all of it, but she also would have understood why he couldn't just walk away. Another text from Charlotte. They're saying I violated company policy by accessing Harlow's computer, saying it's grounds for immediate suspension pending investigation. Mason typed back, can they do that? Apparently yes. Employee Handbook Section 12, Paragraph 4. Unauthorized access to another employee's systems. They're interpreting it broadly enough to include executives. That's insane. You're the CEO. Was the CEO. Pretty sure that's about to change. Mason stood up, paced, sat back down. This was wrong. All of it. Harlow commits actual crimes and walks free. Charlotte tries to expose him and gets punished. The injustice of it made his chest tight with anger he couldn't do anything useful with. His phone rang. Charlotte's number. What happened? Mason answered. They suspended me. Charlotte's voice was flat, empty. Effective immediately. Pending full investigation of the allegations against me. Not against Harlow. Against me. She laughed, sharp and broken. They're escorting me out of the building right now. Security. Like I'm a criminal. Where are you? Executive elevator, heading down. They want me out before lunch, less disruptive to the workday. Wouldn't want to upset people by having them see their CEO getting fired. You're not fired. You're suspended. Semantics. The elevator chimed in the background. Same result. I'm out. Harlow's in. Everything I fought for last night was pointless. It wasn't pointless. Then what was it? Because from where I'm standing, all I did was make myself look paranoid and unstable. All I accomplished was handing Harlow exactly what he wanted. The elevator chimed again. Mason could hear voices now in the background. Security, probably. HR representatives making sure the disgraced CEO left the building without causing a scene. Where can I meet you? Mason asked. You can't. You should go home. Forget this happened. Forget you ever met me. Charlotte's voice cracked slightly. I'm toxic now, Mason. Anyone associated with me is going to get dragged into this. Legal battles, depositions, investigations. You don't need that. Let me decide what I need. I'm serious. This is over. I lost. And I don't want you losing anything else because you were stupid enough to help me. The call ended. Mason stared at his phone, then at the elevator banks across the lobby. He saw Charlotte emerge from the executive elevator 30 seconds later, flanked by 2 security guards and a woman in a business suit who had to be HR. Charlotte walked with her head up, spine straight, every inch the CEO, even while being escorted out like a security risk. She saw Mason. Their eyes met across the crowded lobby. She shook her head slightly. Don't. Mason stayed where he was. Watched Charlotte and her unwanted escort cross to the main entrance. Watched them push through the revolving doors into the cold morning. Watched Charlotte Vale walk away from the company she'd built, the empire she'd sacrificed everything for, the identity she'd wrapped around herself like armor. And then he followed her anyway. Outside, the security guards and the HR woman were getting back into a company car. Charlotte stood on the sidewalk looking lost, just standing there in her expensive coat with nowhere to go and no idea what to do next. Mason walked up beside her. You need a ride? Charlotte turned. I told you to go home. Yeah, well, I'm not great at following orders. Mason gestured toward the parking garage. My van's this way, unless you'd rather stand on the sidewalk until you freeze again. Charlotte looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, the brittle control cracking, exhaustion flooding in to replace it. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. They walked to the parking garage in silence. Got in the van, Mason started the engine and pulled out into late morning traffic. Where to? He asked. Charlotte didn't answer right away. Mason glanced over and saw her staring out the window like she was seeing the city for the first time. I don't know, she finally said. I don't have anywhere to go. My penthouse it's not home, it's just where I sleep when I'm not working, which is apparently never going to happen again. You're going to work again? Doing what? I just got suspended from my own company. Once word gets out, I'll be unhireable. The CEO who went crazy and accused her CFO of conspiracy, the executive who broke into company systems and violated privacy policies. Charlotte pressed her fingers against her temples. My career is over. Everything I built, everything I worked for, just gone. Mason drove. He didn't have answers, didn't have solutions. Just a beat-up van and a morning full of anger at how unfair the world could be. You hungry? He asked. Charlotte looked at him like he'd suggested they fly to the moon. What? Food. When's the last time you ate? And don't say the eggs this morning because you barely touched those. I'm not hungry. You need to eat anyway. Mason turned down a side street. There's a diner near my apartment, nothing fancy, but the food's decent and nobody there cares if you're a CEO or a delivery driver or someone having the worst day of their life. He expected Charlotte to argue, to say she wanted to be alone, to insist he take her back to her empty penthouse, to push him away like she'd been pushing everyone away for years. Instead, she said, "Okay." The diner was called Rosie's, and it had been there since before Mason was born. Red vinyl booths, checkered floor, laminated menus that hadn't changed in 20 years. The kind of place where the coffee was always hot and the waitress called everyone honey, whether she knew them or not. Mason and Charlotte slid into a booth near the back. The waitress, not Rosie, who'd died 10 years ago, but her daughter Maria, who'd taken over, brought coffee without being asked. "You look like you need this," Maria said, setting cups in front of them. "Rough morning?" "Something like that," Mason said. Maria nodded like she understood without needing details. "I'll give you a minute with the menu." Charlotte wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "Does she know you?" "I come here sometimes, after night shifts, before picking up Ava." Mason sipped his coffee. It was terrible, overcooked and bitter. Perfect. "It's quiet. Nobody bothers you. Good place to think." Charlotte looked around the diner. At the other customers, construction workers on lunch break, an elderly couple sharing pancakes, someone doing a crossword puzzle alone. Normal people living normal lives. The kind of people who didn't build billion-dollar companies or stage corporate coups or fight battles that ended with security escorts and suspension letters. "I don't belong here," Charlotte said quietly. "Why not?" "Because I'm not—" She stopped. "I'm not one of them. I'm not normal. I don't have normal problems or normal concerns. I have lawyers and board meetings and corporate espionage." "You also have a suspended company position and nowhere to go and no plan for what happens next," Mason said. "Sounds pretty normal to me. Different scale, maybe. But everyone in this diner's got problems they don't know how to solve." Maria came back. "Know what you want?" Mason ordered eggs and toast. Charlotte ordered the same, probably because it was easier than thinking. Maria disappeared into the kitchen. "What am I supposed to do now?" Charlotte asked. "Seriously, what's the protocol for getting suspended from your own company? Do I just sit around and wait for their investigation to clear me? Do I hire lawyers and fight back? Do I—" She stopped, voice breaking. "I don't know how to not be CEO. That's who I am. That's what I do. Take that away and I'm just nothing." "You're not nothing. Then what am I?" Mason thought about that, about identity and purpose, and all the ways people define themselves by what they did instead of who they were. "You're someone who fought like hell to save something you cared about," he said. "You're someone who didn't give up even when everything was against you. You're someone who kept going when most people would have quit." He met her eyes. "That doesn't change just because Harlow won this round." "This round? Mason, there are no more rounds. I'm out. He's in. Game over." "Is it? Because you're still alive. Still capable. Still have all the intelligence and drive that built Veil Technologies in the first place." Mason leaned forward. "Harlow can take your company, can't take who you are. Can't take away your ability to build something else. Something better." "I don't want something else. I want what's mine." "I know. But sometimes we don't get what we want. Sometimes life takes it anyway, and we have to figure out what comes next." Charlotte looked at him. Really looked, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "You're talking about your wife," she said quietly. "Yeah." "What happened? You said she died, but you never said how." Mason hadn't planned to talk about Sarah. Hadn't planned to drag his grief into Charlotte's crisis. But sitting here in Rosie's diner with a CEO who just lost everything, it seemed wrong to hold back. "Brain aneurysm," he said, completely random, no warning. She was fine 1 minute and collapsed the next. By the time I got to the hospital, she was already gone. Just gone. He stared at his coffee. Ava was 3, barely old enough to understand that mommy wasn't coming home. And I had to figure out how to explain death to a toddler while also figuring out how to keep living when the person who made life make sense was just suddenly not there anymore. Charlotte didn't say anything, just listened. I thought I'd never recover, Mason continued. Thought I'd spend the rest of my life being angry at how unfair it was. How wrong. How Sarah deserved more time, and Ava deserved to grow up with her mother, and I deserved to not be alone at 30 with a mortgage and a daughter and no idea how to do any of it. He looked up. But you know what I learned? Life doesn't care about fair. Doesn't care about what you deserve or what you've earned or how hard you've worked. Life just is. And you either keep going or you don't. Yeah, that's bleak. Maybe. But it's also freeing. Because if life doesn't owe you anything, then you don't owe life anything either. You get to choose. Keep fighting or give up. Build something new or mourn what's lost. Move forward or stay stuck. Mason paused. I chose to keep going. For Ava. For myself. For Sarah, who would have been furious if I'd given up. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. Then, I don't know if I can do that. Build something new. Start over. I put everything into Veil Technologies, 10 years. Every waking hour. Every relationship I sacrificed. Every part of myself I gave up to make it work. Her voice dropped. What if I can't do it again? What if that was my one shot and I already blew it? Then you do something different, something smaller, something that doesn't require sacrificing everything. Mason watched Maria bring their food, set plates in front of them. You ever think maybe the problem wasn't that you built a company, but how you built it? What you gave up along the way? Charlotte picked up her fork, put it down. Harlow said the same thing, about how I drove people away, created a culture where they'd rather conspire than work for me. Harlow's a thief trying to justify his crimes. Don't confuse his manipulation with actual insight. But what if he's right? What if I am the problem? You're not the problem. Your choices might have been. But that's different. Mason took a bite of eggs. They were overcooked, slightly rubbery, exactly what he expected. You can change choices, can't change who you are. And who you are is someone who cares enough to fight. That's worth something. They ate in silence for a while. Charlotte managed about half her plate before pushing it away. Mason finished his and took her leftovers. No point wasting food. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. This is David Chen. We need to talk. Can you meet me at Vale Tower this afternoon? Mason showed Charlotte. You know what this is about? Charlotte read the message. No. But Chen doesn't reach out to random people unless he wants something. She looked up. Don't go. It's a trap. Harlow probably put him up to it. Or maybe Chen's having second thoughts. Maybe seeing you get escorted out made him realize this whole thing's gone too far. You're being optimistic. Someone has to be. Mason typed back. What time? The response came immediately. 2:00. Executive floor reception. Come alone. Mason showed Charlotte again. She shook her head. This is a bad idea. Chen's on Harlow's side, always has been. Whatever he wants to talk about, it's not going to help you. Might help you, though. How? Don't know yet. But sitting here feeling sorry for ourselves isn't accomplishing anything. Might as well see what Chen wants. Charlotte looked like she wanted to argue, but she was too tired to fight anymore. Too defeated to care. Fine, she said. Go meet with Chen. But be careful. These people are good at making things sound reasonable when they're actually setting you up. They left the diner. Mason drove Charlotte to her penthouse, 43rd floor of a luxury building downtown, the kind of place with doormen and marble lobbies and rent that probably cost more per month than Mason made in a year. Charlotte got out slowly, like her body had finally given up on pretending to function. Thank you, she said through the passenger window, for everything. For stopping last night. For helping. For caring when you didn't have to. What are you going to do now? Mason asked. Sleep, maybe. If I can. Charlotte managed a broken smile. Then I don't know. Wait for the investigation. Wait for my lawyers to call. Wait for whatever comes next. She straightened slightly. What about you? Pick up Ava. Make her those pancakes I promised. Then meet with Chen and see what he wants. Be careful. Always am. Charlotte nodded and walked into her building. Mason watched her disappear into the lobby, shoulders slumped, all the fight drained out of her. Then he drove to Emma's house to get his daughter. Ava was covered in flour when Mason arrived. She and Emma had apparently taken cookie making very seriously, with results that looked more like modern art than food. Daddy! Ava ran to him, leaving flowery footprints across Emma's mom's kitchen. We made 17 cookies and I only ate 3. Only 3? That's very restrained. Mason scooped her up, flour and all. Thank Emma's mom for letting you visit. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson, Ava said dutifully. Any time, sweetheart. Mason, you need anything else? Just call. I mean it. Mrs. Patterson had the look of someone who'd noticed Mason was running himself ragged and wanted to help but didn't know how. I appreciate it, Mason said. Really? They left with a container of misshapen cookies and Ava chattering about everything she'd learned about proper frosting technique. Mason drove them home, made grilled cheese for lunch because pancakes could wait until dinner, and tried not to think about Charlotte alone in her penthouse or what Chen wanted to discuss at 2 o'clock. At 1:30, Ava was settled with her coloring books and strict instructions not to answer the door for anyone. Mason called Mrs. Patterson and asked if she could check on Ava in 20 minutes, just to make sure she was okay. Mrs. Patterson agreed immediately, like she'd been waiting for Mason to ask for help. Then Mason drove back to Vale Tower for the 3rd time that day, wondering what fresh disaster waited for him this time. Chen was in the executive floor reception area when Mason arrived, standing by the windows with his hands clasped behind his back. He turned when the elevator opened, and Mason saw something in his expression that might have been uncertainty. Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. You said we needed to talk. We do, but not here. Chen gestured toward a small conference room. More private. They walked to the same room where Mason and Charlotte had hidden earlier, where they'd listened to Harlow plan his coup. Chen closed the door and gestured for Mason to sit. Mason stayed standing. I'll make this quick, Chen said. The board made a mistake this morning, suspending Ms. Vale while leaving Harlow in place. I know that now. Took you long enough. We had incomplete information, conflicting stories. We defaulted to procedure when we should have looked more carefully at what was actually happening. Chen pulled out his phone. After the meeting, after Charlotte was escorted out, I did what you suggested, ran a comparison between legacy financial records and current accounts. Mason's attention sharpened. And? The discrepancies are there, exactly as you described. $700,000 moved through consulting fees and expense adjustments over 18 months. Current system shows everything balanced. Legacy system shows the money missing. Chen looked up. That's not a glitch. That's deliberate manipulation. So Harlow was embezzling. Appears that way, but proving it will take time. Forensic accountants, legal review, formal investigation. Chen paused. Time Charlotte doesn't have. If Harlow suspects we're looking into the finances, he'll destroy whatever evidence remains. Make it look like accounting errors. Blame it on system transitions. So what are you going to do? I'm going to recommend emergency board session tonight. Present the financial evidence. Vote to remove Harlow immediately and reinstate Charlotte. Chen met Mason's eyes. But I need your help. My help doing what? Testifying. As witness to what happened last night. The conspiracy, the emails, everything you and Charlotte uncovered. Chen leaned forward slightly. The board needs to hear from someone neutral, someone without stake in the company, someone who can verify that Charlotte's accusations weren't paranoid delusions but actual events that happened. Mason thought about that. About standing in front of a board of wealthy executives and explaining how he'd helped their CEO break into their CFO's office. About the legal exposure, the potential consequences, the way this could explode in his face. What's in it for you? Mason asked. Why help Charlotte now when you voted to suspend her this morning? Chen was quiet for a moment. Because I've known Charlotte for 8 years. Watched her build Vale Technologies from failing software company to billion-dollar enterprise. Seen her make hard decisions, sacrifice personal relationships, drive herself into the ground for this company. He looked away. And this morning I watched her get escorted out like a criminal while the actual criminal stayed in power. That's not right, and I'm not going to be part of making it permanent. You realize Harlow's going to fight this, going to accuse me of lying, going to make this as ugly as possible. I know, but if you don't testify, Charlotte loses everything. And I have to live with knowing I could have helped and chose not to. Chen pulled out a business card, wrote something on the back. Emergency board session, 7 o'clock tonight, conference room 42. You show up and tell the truth. I'll make sure the other board members listen. Mason took the card, stared at the address he already knew, the time that would require finding another babysitter for Ava. The commitment to walk back into this disaster when he could just go home and pretend none of it had happened. Charlotte know about this? Mason asked. Not yet. I wanted to secure your testimony first, make sure you were willing before I approached her. She's going to say it's a trap. Probably. She's been burned too many times today to trust easily. Chen moved toward the door. But you trusted her enough to help last night. Trusted her enough to drive her around the city and break into my office and access Harlow's computer. Maybe she'll trust you enough to try one more time. Chen left. Mason stood in the small conference room alone, holding a business card with an address and a time and a choice he had to make. He pulled out his phone, called Charlotte. Mason? She answered on the first ring. What happened? Are you okay? I'm fine. Chen wanted to meet. He found the financial discrepancies. Wants to call emergency board session tonight to remove Harlow. Silence on the other end. Then, it's a trap. Maybe. Or maybe it's real. Why would Chen help me now? He voted to suspend me, sided with Harlow. What changed? He saw the evidence, ran the numbers himself, says he made a mistake and wants to fix it. Mason paused. He wants me to testify. Be witness to what happened last night. Verify your story. More silence. Mason could practically hear Charlotte thinking, weighing probabilities, trying to figure out if this was legitimate or another betrayal waiting to happen. Don't do it, she finally said. It's too risky. Chen could be setting you up, getting you to admit to unauthorized access, corporate espionage, then using that testimony against both of us. Or he could be genuine, could actually want to help. Nobody helps, Mason. Not in this world. Not when there's money and power on the line. Charlotte's voice had gone hard. Chen's protecting himself. That's all this is. He sees Harlow going down and wants to be on the winning side. The second it's more advantageous to side against me, he will. So what's the alternative? You stay suspended? Let Harlow keep the company? The alternative is we stop fighting battles we can't win, except that some things are over. Move on. Charlotte sounded tired beyond measure. I appreciate what you're trying to do, really, but this is done. I'm done, and I don't want to drag you down with me. Charlotte, please, Mason, just let it go. Go home to your daughter. Forget you ever met me. Forget this entire mess. You've done enough, more than enough, and her voice cracked. I can't watch you get hurt trying to save something that's already lost. The call ended. Mason stood in the conference room holding his dead phone and Chen's business card and the weight of a decision that felt too big for one person to make. He thought about Ava, about picking her up from school and making pancakes and reading bedtime stories and all the normal parts of life that didn't involve corporate conspiracies and board meetings and testifying against powerful people who could make his life very difficult. He thought about Sarah, about how she'd always said his problem was he cared too much, got involved too deeply, couldn't walk away from people who needed help even when helping them hurt. He thought about Charlotte at that bus stop, alone, scared, nobody answering her calls, and how one person deciding to stop had changed everything, started this whole chain of events that led to this moment, this choice, this crossroads. Mason looked at the business card one more time. Then he pulled out his phone and started making calls. First, Mrs. Patterson. I know it's last minute, but can Ava stay with you tonight? I have something important I need to handle. Should be done by 9 at the latest. Mrs. Patterson didn't hesitate. Of course, bring her over whenever. She can have dinner with us. Second, his old cybersecurity colleague Marcus, the one who'd helped them into the building last night. I need a favor, big one. Documentation kind. Think you can help? Marcus was quiet for a beat. Then, how illegal are we talking? Gray area, documenting evidence of actual crimes but doing it in ways that might not be strictly authorized. So very illegal. Pretty much. Marcus laughed. What time do you need me? By 6:30, Mason had Ava settled at the Pattersons' house, with promises of an extra bedtime story when he picked her up. Had Marcus standing by with technical expertise and documentation tools, had his own testimony mentally prepared and legally questionable, but hopefully defensible. What he didn't have was Charlotte. He tried calling her again, straight to voicemail, sent 3 texts. No response. She'd shut him out, decided this was over, chosen to accept defeat rather than risk more pain. Mason understood that impulse, respected it even. But he also knew that giving up on Charlotte meant giving up on the idea that fighting back mattered, that standing up to powerful people who did wrong things was worth the cost, that sometimes the only thing standing between injustice and justice was whether someone decided to show up. At 6:45, Mason walked into Vale Tower one more time, took the executive elevator to the 42nd floor, stepped out into the reception area where this entire disaster had started 12 hours ago. The conference room was already filling up. Board members arriving in expensive suits, lawyers carrying briefcases, Chen standing near the head of the table looking nervous. Harlow wasn't there yet, probably because he didn't know about the emergency session, probably about to get a very unpleasant surprise. Chen saw Mason and crossed to him quickly. "You came." "Said I would." "Is Charlotte coming?" "Don't know. She's not answering her phone." Mason looked around the conference room. "This gonna work?" "Honestly, no idea, but it's the best shot we've got." Chen handed Mason a folder. Financial documentation, legacy system comparisons, everything that proves Harlow's embezzlement. You'll need to reference this when you testify. Mason took the folder, opened it, saw spreadsheets and bank records, and highlighted discrepancies that told the story of 18 months of theft, evidence that would destroy Harlow's career and possibly send him to prison, evidence that would also expose how Mason and Charlotte had obtained it. "This is going to get messy," Mason said. "Already is messy. Now, we're just making it official." Chen checked his watch. "We start in 10 minutes, with or without Charlotte." Mason pulled out his phone, tried calling Charlotte one more time. This time she answered. "Mason, I told you. I'm at Vale Tower. Emergency board session starts in 10 minutes. Chen has the evidence. Board members are here. This is happening whether you show up or not." Mason kept his voice steady. "But it should be you who presents this. You who finishes what we started last night. You who takes back what's yours." "I can't. I'm suspended. They won't even let me in the building." "So unsuspend yourself. Walk in like you own the place, because you do." Mason moved toward the windows, away from the filling conference room. "You told me you didn't know who you were without being CEO. Here's your chance to find out. Are you someone who quits when things get hard? Or are you someone who fights until there's nothing left to fight for?" Charlotte was quiet. Mason could hear traffic in the background. She was outside, moving. "If I come," she said slowly, "if I walk into that conference room and this goes wrong, I lose everything. My reputation, my career, any chance of rebuilding. And if you don't come, you definitely lose everything. At least this way you're losing on your own terms." More silence. Then, "I'm 5 minutes away." The call ended. Mason walked back into the conference room. Chen looked at him questioningly. Mason nodded. Chen's shoulders sagged slightly with relief. At 6:58, Harlow arrived. He walked into the conference room with the confidence of someone who thought he'd already won, saw the assembled board members, and stopped. "What's going on?" Harlow asked. "Emergency session," Chen said. "We have new evidence regarding the allegations against you. Evidence that requires immediate board attention." Harlow's expression shifted, confidence replaced by wariness. "What evidence? And who authorized an emergency session?" "I did. As head of the audit committee, I have authority to call board meetings when financial irregularities are discovered." Chen gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Robert. We need to talk." At 6:59, the elevator chimed. Charlotte Vale stepped out. She'd changed clothes, put on a business suit, fixed her hair, somehow transformed from defeated CEO into the woman who'd built a billion-dollar company and wasn't about to let anyone take it without a fight. She walked into the conference room like she owned it. Because she did. Harlow stood up. "Charlotte, you're not supposed to be here. You're suspended." "Suspension rescinded," Chen said. "As of 10 minutes ago. Board vote 4-3. Welcome back, Ms. Vale." Charlotte looked at Chen. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Or acknowledgement that mistakes could be corrected if people were willing to try. Then Charlotte turned to Harlow. "Sit down, Robert," she said quietly. "We need to talk about the $700,000 you stole from my company." And Mason watched as the board meeting that would decide everything finally began. Harlow didn't sit down. He stood there, hands gripping the back of the chair, knuckles white against the leather. Mason watched the calculation happen in real time, Harlow weighing his options, trying to figure out how much they actually knew versus how much they were bluffing. 700,000, Harlow repeated slowly. "That's a very specific number, Charlotte. Where exactly are you getting that from?" "Legacy financial system," Chen said before Charlotte could answer. "I ran the comparison myself this afternoon." Current accounts show everything balanced. Legacy records show systematic transfers through consulting fees and expense adjustments. 18 months of small movements that add up to exactly $703,217. Harlow's jaw tightened. Legacy systems are unreliable. Everyone knows that. Data corruption, migration errors. You can't base accusations on outdated databases. I can when those databases show a clear pattern, Chen continued. When the transfers correspond to real expense reports filed under your authorization. When the consulting companies receiving payment don't actually exist beyond P.O. box addresses and shell corporation filings. He opened a folder on the table. Want to explain why Vail Technologies paid $200,000 to Cornerstone Consulting Group, a company registered to an address in Delaware that turns out to be a UPS store? The room had gone very quiet. Board members leaning forward, lawyers taking notes. Charlotte standing at the head of the table with her arms crossed, watching Harlow squirm. This is character assassination, Harlow said. You're cherry-picking data to support a narrative Charlotte created because she can't accept that people wanted her out. People wanted me out because you spent months manipulating them, Charlotte said. Her voice was steady, cold. Feeding them false reports, making me look incompetent, building your case so that when you staged your conspiracy, they'd be primed to believe I was the problem. Conspiracy, Harlow laughed. You keep using that word like it means something. I had a meeting with you. Your transportation got confused. You made poor choices about how to handle it. That's not conspiracy. That's you being unable to manage basic logistics. Is that what you told the board members you emailed? Mason spoke from his position against the wall. The ones you sent detailed timelines to? The ones who knew exactly when to trigger the emergency succession clause? Harlow's attention snapped to Mason. You're not part of this board. You don't get to speak. He's a witness, Chen said, and he's going to testify about what you did, what he saw, what you planned. He's a nobody who helped Charlotte break into my office and steal confidential information. Harlow turned to the board members. Are we really going to take testimony from someone who committed corporate espionage, who violated every privacy policy this company has? We're going to take testimony from someone who helped uncover fraud, Charlotte corrected, and then we're going to vote on whether to terminate you immediately or give you the option to resign. You can't terminate me. You're suspended. Not anymore, Chen said. Emergency board vote while you were in transit. 4 members voted to reinstate Charlotte, immediately based on new evidence. Suspension lifted as of 7 o'clock. Mason saw the moment Harlow realized he'd lost. Saw the careful mask slip, rage flooding in to replace the calculated calm. Harlow's hands were shaking slightly where they gripped the chair. This is illegal, Harlow said. Emergency vote without proper notification. Without giving me opportunity to defend myself, I'll sue. I'll take this company apart piece by piece. You're welcome to try, Charlotte said. But first you're going to sit down and explain to this board exactly how you stole $700,000 from Vail Technologies, how you planned to frame me, how you coordinated with executives to strand me at a fake meeting, how you arranged for my phone calls to go unanswered. She leaned forward. All of it, Robert. Every detail. And maybe, if you're honest, we'll let you walk away instead of having you arrested. Harlow stared at her. Then he did something Mason didn't expect. He sat down, not in defeat, in control, like he was choosing to participate instead of being forced. Okay, Harlow said quietly. You want the truth? Fine. Here's the truth. He looked around the table at each board member. I did embezzle funds. Started small. Expense reports that were slightly inflated. Consulting fees for services that didn't quite exist. Easy to hide in a company this size. Easy to justify if anyone asked. Harlow's voice was matter-of-fact. But I didn't do it for greed. I did it because I was building a case. Documentation that Charlotte was a terrible manager. That under her leadership, financial controls were so loose that significant theft could happen for 18 months without detection. Charlotte's face had gone pale. You're admitting you stole money to prove I was bad at my job? I'm admitting I created evidence that the board would eventually discover. Evidence that would raise questions about your competence, your attention to detail, your ability to protect company assets. Harlow leaned back. And it worked. Once Chen found those discrepancies, what was his first thought? That the CEO should have caught this, that someone wasn't paying attention, that maybe Charlotte Vail wasn't as capable as everyone thought. Chen started to object. Harlow raised a hand. Don't pretend I'm wrong. You're already thinking it. All of you are. If Charlotte was running this company properly, how did embezzlement happen? How did $700,000 disappear without anyone noticing? Harlow looked directly at Charlotte. I made you look incompetent. That was the point. And even now, even caught, I've still accomplished what I set out to do. Made the board question whether you're fit to lead. The silence that followed was absolute. Mason watched Charlotte's expression shift through about a dozen emotions. Shock, rage, hurt, and finally something colder, more calculated. She walked slowly around the table until she was standing directly in front of Harlow.
You're right, Charlotte said quietly. You did make me look incompetent, made the board question my leadership, made them wonder if I was paying attention. She paused. But you know what you also did? You proved that I was right about you, that my instincts about betrayal and conspiracy weren't paranoid delusions but actual reality. That the person I trusted was actively working to destroy me. She turned to face the board members.
Robert's correct that I should have caught the embezzlement earlier, should have been reviewing legacy systems more carefully, should have had better financial controls in place to prevent this kind of theft. Charlotte's voice was steady. Those are legitimate failures on my part. Mistakes I made because I was too focused on growth and not focused enough on internal security. Mason saw where she was going, saw Charlotte taking responsibility instead of making excuses. Owning her mistakes while simultaneously using them against Harlow. But here's the difference between Robert and me, Charlotte continued. When I make mistakes, I fix them. I learn. I build better systems. I don't commit crimes to prove a point. She looked back at Harlow. You embezzled $700,000. You staged a conspiracy. You violated every ethical standard this company has. And you did it because you wanted power you hadn't earned. I earned it, Harlow snapped. 8 years with this company. 8 years of watching you make decision after decision that prioritized your ego over what was actually good for Vail Technologies. 8 years of fixing your mistakes, managing your failures, keeping this company running while you took all the credit. Then you should have challenged me openly, gone to the board with your concerns, built a legitimate case for leadership change. Charlotte's voice hardened. Instead, you chose theft and conspiracy. You chose to make yourself a criminal, and now you're trying to justify it by claiming you were protecting the company from me. I was protecting the company from you, from your reckless expansion, your refusal to delegate, your complete inability to see that people were exhausted trying to keep up with your impossible standards. Harlow stood again. You want to know why executives conspired against you, Charlotte? Because working for you was unsustainable. You demanded sacrifice but gave nothing back. You expected loyalty but showed none. You built an empire on the backs of people you treated as disposable. That's not... Charlotte started. It is true, Harlow interrupted. And everyone in this room knows it. They're just too polite to say it out loud. He looked at the board members. How many people has Charlotte burned through in the last 10 years? How many executives left because they couldn't maintain the pace? How many employees quit because they were tired of being treated like machines instead of human beings? Margaret Weiss spoke up for the first time. He has a point, Charlotte. Your turnover rate in executive positions is significantly higher than industry average. We've discussed this before. I have high standards, Charlotte said. You have impossible standards, Harlow corrected. Standards that made people choose conspiracy over continued employment. That's on you, Charlotte, not on me. I just gave them an alternative. Mason had heard enough. He stepped away from the wall. You're both wrong, he said. Everyone turned to look at him. Charlotte with surprise, Harlow with contempt, the board members with varying degrees of curiosity and irritation. Mr. Reed, Chen said carefully, perhaps you should... No, I should talk. Because I'm the only person in this room who doesn't have a stake in this company, who doesn't care about quarterly profits or executive turnover or who gets credit for what. Mason looked at Charlotte, then at Harlow. You're both right about each other's failures, and you're both using those failures to avoid dealing with your own. He turned to Harlow first. You stole, you conspired, you committed actual crimes, and now you're trying to justify those crimes by saying Charlotte was a bad boss. That's garbage. Lots of people have bad bosses. Most of them don't respond by embezzling and staging corporate coups. Mason kept his voice level. You made choices. Illegal, unethical choices.
Own them instead of blaming Charlotte for creating an environment that made you do it. Harlow's face flushed red. You have no idea what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've had terrible jobs, bosses who didn't appreciate me, companies that treated me like I was replaceable. And you know what I did? I quit. I found something better. I made different choices. Mason paused. I didn't steal. I didn't conspire. I took responsibility for my own life instead of blaming someone else for my decisions. He turned to Charlotte. And you? Harlow's right that you created an unsustainable culture, that you demanded too much and gave too little, that your leadership style pushed people away. Mason saw Charlotte flinch. But unlike Harlow, you're actually capable of learning from that, of changing, of building something better. How do you know? Charlotte asked quietly.
Because I watched you do it last night. Watched you question yourself. Admit mistakes. Recognize that maybe the way you'd been doing things wasn't working. Mason moved closer. The person I met at that bus stop was scared and alone and realizing that sacrificing everything for success had left her with nothing when success disappeared. That's painful. But it's also the beginning of actually changing. The room had gone quiet again. Mason could feel the board members watching, trying to figure out who this delivery driver was and why his opinion mattered. Here's what I think should happen, Mason said, looking at Chen. Harlow gets terminated immediately. Criminal charges filed for embezzlement and conspiracy. No severance, no deals. He committed crimes and he faces consequences. Harlow started to object. Chen held up a hand. Continue, Chen said to Mason. Charlotte gets reinstated as CEO, but with conditions. Real conditions. Not just promises to do better, but actual structural changes. Bring in a COO who can handle day-to-day operations. Hire an executive coach to work on leadership style. Implement better financial oversight so embezzlement can't happen again. Mason looked at Charlotte. Use this as an opportunity to rebuild the company culture instead of just going back to the way things were. Charlotte was staring at him like she'd never seen him before. And the board, Mason continued, turning to face them, needs to actually do your job, which means oversight, which means catching problems before they become crises, which means not just rubber stamping whatever the CEO wants because she's been successful in the past. He stopped, realized he'd just lectured a room full of billionaires and executives like he had any authority to do so, realized he was probably about to get thrown out of the building and possibly sued for his trouble. But then Chen nodded slowly. Mr. Reed's recommendations have merit, Chen said. Robert, you're terminated effective immediately. We'll be referring this matter to law enforcement. You have 10 minutes to collect your personal belongings before security escorts you from the building. Harlow stood there, mouth open. You can't... We can, and we are, Weiss said. The embezzlement alone is grounds for termination. The conspiracy makes it criminal. You're done, Robert. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway like they'd been waiting for this exact moment. Probably had been, Mason realized. Chen had planned this carefully. Harlow looked around the table one last time, at the board members who were already avoiding his eyes, at Charlotte who stood with her arms crossed, watching him fall, at Mason who'd helped orchestrate his destruction. This isn't over, Harlow said. Yeah, it is, Mason replied. You're just too proud to admit it. Security escorted Harlow out. The door closed behind them, and the conference room felt lighter somehow, like removing a source of poison had let clean air back in. Chen turned to Charlotte. We'll need to discuss the conditions Mr. Reed mentioned, the structural changes, the oversight improvements. I know. Charlotte sat down heavily. And he's right about all of it. I created the environment that made this possible. I need to fix that. Not tonight, though, Weiss said, and her voice had softened slightly. Tonight you should go home. Rest. Tomorrow we'll start figuring out how to rebuild. The board members started gathering their things, lawyers closing briefcases, Chen making notes about next steps. The meeting was dissolving, crisis averted, immediate disaster resolved. Charlotte caught Mason's arm as he started to leave. Wait, please. The conference room emptied until it was just the two of them. Charlotte still sitting at the head of the table. Mason standing near the door, ready to leave, ready to get back to his actual life. Thank you, Charlotte said, for testifying, for being honest, for calling me out on my failures instead of just supporting me blindly. You needed to hear it. I did, but that doesn't make it easier. Charlotte looked down at her hands. Everything you said was true. I drove people away, created a culture where conspiracy seemed like a reasonable option. That's on me. So fix it. I don't know if I can. Don't know if I know how to be a different kind of leader. This is who I've been for 10 years, the demanding CEO, the person who sacrifices everything for success. Charlotte looked up. What if I can't change? What if this is just who I am? Mason thought about that, about Sarah and grief, and the person he'd been before versus the person he'd become after, about how change was possible but never easy, never simple. You can change, Mason said, but you have to want to, have to be willing to give up the parts of yourself that aren't working. Build new patterns, new habits, new ways of relating to people. He moved closer. Question is whether you want to badly enough, whether you're willing to be uncomfortable for a while in exchange for building something better. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. Then, will you help me? Help you how? I don't know. Consulting, advice, just someone who tells me the truth instead of what I want to hear. Charlotte stood. You're good at that. At seeing through the performance to what's actually happening. I need that. Need someone who isn't afraid of me, who doesn't have a stake in keeping me comfortable. Mason wanted to say no. Wanted to explain that he had a daughter to raise and bills to pay, and a life that didn't include consulting for billionaire CEOs. Wanted to draw a line between the extraordinary circumstance of last night and the ordinary reality of tomorrow. But he looked at Charlotte, exhausted, vulnerable, genuinely asking for help, and remembered the woman at the bus stop, the one who'd been alone and scared with nobody willing to answer her calls. I'll help, Mason said, but not as a consultant, as a friend, someone who checks in, keeps you honest, reminds you when you're slipping back into old patterns. I don't have friends, not real ones. Then maybe that's something else you should fix. Charlotte almost smiled. Almost. Okay, friend, I can try that. They walked to the elevator together, rode down in silence, stepped out into the lobby where the night shift was arriving, where the building was transitioning from day to evening, where normal business continued regardless of boardroom drama. Outside, the city had settled into its nighttime rhythm. Traffic lighter. Streets quieter. The snow from last night was already melting, turning to slush and puddles, the storm already becoming memory. What happens now? Charlotte asked. Now? Now you go home. Sleep. Actually sleep, not just lie awake thinking about work. Tomorrow you start making changes. Small ones. Build from there. Mason pulled out his keys. And you text me in 3 days to let me know you're still trying, that you haven't slipped back into working 18-hour days and treating people like machines. 3 days. I can do that. We'll see. Charlotte surprised him by pulling him into a hug. Brief, awkward, like she wasn't entirely sure how hugging worked, but genuine. Thank you, she said quietly, for stopping, for helping, for caring enough to tell me hard truths. You would have done the same. Charlotte pulled back. No, I wouldn't have. That's the problem. I would have driven past that bus stop without slowing down. Would have been too focused on getting home, too busy, too important to stop for a stranger. She looked at him. You're a better person than I am, Mason Reed. I'm just a person, same as you, same as everyone. Mason gestured toward the parking garage. I need to pick up my daughter. You need to go home and actually rest. We both need to stop standing on sidewalks having profound conversations. Charlotte laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was rusty, like she hadn't used it in years, but real. They parted ways. Charlotte heading toward her building, Mason toward his van. Two people from different worlds returning to their separate lives, connected now by one strange night and the understanding that sometimes strangers could save you when the people you trusted couldn't. Mason picked up Ava from the Pattersons' house at 8:30. She was half asleep, full of cookies, covered in flour that hadn't quite washed off. Did you fix the ladies' problem? Ava asked as Mason carried her to the van. Yeah, sweetheart. I think we did. Good. She seems sad. I don't like when people are sad. Me neither. Mason got Ava home through the bedtime routine, tucked into bed with Mr. Carrot and promises of pancakes in the morning. He stood in her doorway for a minute watching her sleep, this tiny person who made every sacrifice worth it, every struggle meaningful, every choice to keep going instead of giving up the only choice that mattered. His phone buzzed. Text from Charlotte. Made it home. Thank you again. See you in 3 days. Mason typed back, "Get some sleep."
The response came immediately. "I'll try."
Mason smiled and put his phone away, went to the kitchen and made himself the terrible coffee he'd been drinking for 6 years, sat at the table where he and Charlotte had worked through the night, where they'd found evidence and made plans, and started something that had ended with a CEO getting her company back and a criminal getting caught. His laptop was still sitting on the counter, ancient and battered. Mason opened it, pulled up the photos he'd taken of Harlow's emails before his phone died, looked at the evidence that had helped save Charlotte's company. Then he deleted them, all of them. Because whatever happened next, it needed to be built on legitimate investigation and proper legal process, not on stolen photos from a delivery driver's cracked phone. The lighthouse puzzle was still on the coffee table, half finished, waiting. Mason looked at it and thought about calling Charlotte in a few days, about checking to make sure she was actually changing instead of just promising to, about being the kind of friend who showed up and told hard truths and cared enough to push back when pushing back was needed. 3 days later, Charlotte texted, "Still trying. Hired a COO. Met with HR about culture changes. It's uncomfortable. I hate it, but I'm doing it." Mason replied, "Good. Keep going." A week after that, Charlotte showed up at his apartment with takeout and asked if she could join the lighthouse puzzle session. Ava was delighted. Mason was surprised. And somehow it became a thing. Weekly dinners, puzzle progress, conversations that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with actually knowing each other. A month later, Vail Technologies announced major restructuring, new executive positions, culture initiatives, financial oversight improvements. The business press called it a bold move. Employees called it overdue. Charlotte called Mason and asked if he thought she was doing it right. "I think you're trying," Mason said. "That's more than most people do." Is trying enough? It's a start. 3 months later, Charlotte offered Mason a position. Not consulting, not executive level, just a job in cybersecurity at Vail Technologies. Better pay than delivery driving, better hours, better benefits. The kind of opportunity Sarah would have wanted him to take. Mason thought about it for a week before saying yes. 6 months later, Ava asked if Charlotte was going to be her new mom. "It doesn't work like that, sweetheart," Mason explained, even though he'd been wondering the same thing. Even though weekly dinners had turned into something that looked suspiciously like dating. Even though Charlotte had started asking about Ava's school and showing up to soccer games and learning how to be part of a family instead of just a CEO. But she comes over all the time, and she helps with puzzles, and she laughs now. She didn't laugh before. "You're right, she didn't." Mason pulled Ava into a hug. "Charlotte's learning how to be happy. Takes time. We need to be patient." "I can be patient," Ava said seriously. "I waited 3 whole weeks to finish the lighthouse puzzle." A year after the night at the bus stop, Mason and Charlotte stood at the window of his apartment, the same window where she'd first admitted she was scared, where she'd started to understand that power and success couldn't protect you from loneliness. Outside, the city looked the same as always, busy, indifferent, moving forward whether individual lives improved or fell apart. "You ever think about that night?" Charlotte asked. "Sometimes. Usually when I'm driving past that bus stop." "Do you regret it?" "Stopping, getting involved, everything that came after." Mason thought about that, about the complications and the stress and the legal depositions and the way his life had gotten infinitely more complex the moment he'd decided to help a stranger. "No," he said. "I don't regret it. Even though it was messy, even though nothing went according to plan, especially because of that. Life's messy, plans fail. Things don't work out the way you expect." Mason looked at her. "But sometimes you meet people worth the mess. Sometimes stopping for a stranger changes everything. Sometimes the hard choice is the right choice, even when you can't see why yet." Charlotte leaned against him. "I would have frozen to death at that bus stop if you hadn't stopped." "Maybe. Or maybe someone else would have helped. Maybe you would have figured it out yourself. But you did stop. You did help. And that mattered." Behind them, Ava was working on a new puzzle, a carousel this time. 500 pieces. She'd insisted on trying it without help, wanted to prove she could handle something harder. Mason thought about Ava growing up with Charlotte in her life. Thought about the example they were setting, that people could change, that mistakes could be fixed, that choosing to care about someone was worth whatever complications came with it. Thought about Sarah and how she'd loved fiercely, completely, without reservation. How she'd taught him that the worst thing you could do was hold back. Play it safe. Protect yourself so carefully that you never let anyone close enough to matter.
I'm glad you stopped, Charlotte said quietly.
I'm glad you cared enough to get involved when you didn't have to. I'm glad you told me hard truths and pushed me to change and didn't just let me keep being the person I'd been. She turned to face him. You saved me, Mason. Not just from freezing at that bus stop, from myself. From a life that looked successful but felt empty. From becoming someone I wouldn't even recognize. You saved yourself, Mason corrected. I just showed up and refused to leave. Sometimes that's all someone needs. Someone who shows up, someone who stays. Charlotte smiled. Someone who answers when everyone else ignores the call. Ava looked up from her puzzle. Are you guys being mushy again? Little bit, Mason admitted. Gross. Ava went back to her puzzle, grinning. Mason pulled Charlotte closer and thought about the difference between the life he'd planned and the life he was living. Thought about how loss and grief had forced him to rebuild everything from scratch. How that rebuilding had left him open to possibilities he never would have considered before. How stopping at a bus stop on a snowy night had led here, to this moment, to this family that didn't look like what he'd expected, but felt right anyway. Outside, the city kept moving. People driving past bus stops, making choices, deciding whether to stop or keep going, whether to get involved or stay safe, whether to care about strangers or protect themselves from complications. And somewhere out there, Mason knew someone else was making the same choice he'd made that night. Stopping when they should keep driving, helping when they should mind their own business, choosing compassion over convenience, because that was how the world actually changed. Not through grand gestures or perfect plans, but through small choices. Individual moments. Single people deciding that someone else's crisis mattered more than their own comfort. One bus stop at a time, one stranger at a time, one choice at a time to show up and care and refuse to walk away even when walking away would be easier. Charlotte had needed saving that night. But in saving her, Mason had saved something in himself too. Had remembered that life was bigger than grief and bills and the daily grind of survival. Had rediscovered that connecting with people, building relationships, choosing to care. That was what made the hard days worth living through. Thank you, Charlotte said again. You already thanked me. About 100 times. I know. But I mean it every time. Charlotte looked at Ava, then at the apartment, then at Mason. This, what we're building, it's the first thing that's felt real in 10 years. The first thing that mattered more than success or profit or being the best. She paused. You gave me that. Showed me what I was missing, what I'd sacrificed without realizing it. You would have figured it out eventually. No, I wouldn't have. I would have kept going, kept sacrificing, kept building empires and losing myself until there was nothing left except the job. Charlotte smiled, sad and honest. That bus stop was my last chance, and you were there, and that saved me. Mason wanted to argue, wanted to say that Charlotte was giving him too much credit, that people saved themselves, that he'd just been in the right place at the right time. But watching her face, open, vulnerable, genuinely grateful, he understood that some truths were worth accepting even when they made you uncomfortable. Okay, he said quietly. You're welcome. And in the warm light of apartment 314, with Ava working on her puzzle and Charlotte leaning against him and the city moving forward outside, Mason understood that stopping at that bus stop had been the most important delivery he'd ever made. Not packages, not goods, but connection. Hope. The reminder that in a world that often felt cold and indifferent, individual choices to care still mattered. Individual people deciding to help still made a difference. Individual moments of compassion still changed lives. The lighthouse puzzle from before sat completed on a shelf. Ava's first big achievement, preserved behind glass. Charlotte had bought the frame, had insisted they keep it as a reminder of where they'd started, of the night everything changed. Mason looked at it sometimes and remembered the woman who'd been falling apart at his kitchen table. The CEO who'd lost everything and didn't know how to exist without it. The person who'd needed saving and learned to save herself with help from a delivery driver who'd decided that strangers mattered. And he thought about all the people driving past bus stops right now. All the individuals deciding whether to stop or keep going. All the moments of choice happening across the city, across the world, every second of every day. Most people kept driving. That was just reality. Everyone had their own problems, their own crises, their own reasons why getting involved was too risky. But some people stopped. Some people cared. Some people chose compassion over convenience and changed everything. Mason had been that person once, on a snowy night, at a frozen bus stop, for a stranger who needed help. And it had made all the difference, not just for Charlotte, but for him, for Ava, for the family they were building together, for the life they were creating from the wreckage of loss and the possibility of second chances. "Daddy?" Ava called from the puzzle. "I need help with this corner piece." Mason crossed to her, leaving Charlotte by the window, knelt beside his daughter and examined the puzzle, found the piece she needed, handed it to her, and watched as she fitted into place. "Good job," he said. "Thanks." Ava looked up at him. "Are you happy, Daddy?" The question surprised him. "Yeah, sweetheart, I'm happy." "Why?" "Because you smile more now, since Charlotte started coming over. You smile like you used to when Mommy was here." Mason felt his throat tighten. "You remember that?" "A little, not a lot, but I remember you being happy." Ava went back to her puzzle. "I like when you're happy." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Charlotte had moved away from the window, was standing in the kitchen doorway watching them. She didn't say anything, didn't interrupt, just observed this moment between father and daughter with something soft in her expression. And Mason understood that this quiet evening in a small apartment with a half-finished puzzle and leftover takeout and people who cared about each other, this was what mattered. This was what he'd been working toward without realizing it. This was what made all the struggle and sacrifice and difficult days worth it. Not success, not achievement, not building empires or making fortunes, but connection, family, choosing to show up for the people who needed you and letting them show up for you in return. The city outside kept moving, life kept happening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems, new moments where choices had to be made. But tonight, in apartment 314, everything was exactly where it needed to be. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.